Welcome all of you back who joined us yesterday. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time today, welcome. We're extremely happy that you're here today for an action-packed day. My name is Matt Pluta, and I'm your Choptank Riverkeeper with Shore Rivers, based on Maryland's Eastern Shore. I once again have the honor and privilege of serving as your MC and moderator for today's program. Yesterday was a powerful and informational packed day. We heard from legislators, advocates, and agency leaders on some of the most pressing climate and energy issues facing Maryland. We talked about data centers and grid reliability, utility oversight, ratepayer protections, and nuclear energy. For me, it was a good reminder of just how complex and how urgent this work really is. And today, we're going to keep that momentum going. Before I get into what we have in store for day two, I want to take a moment to thank the people who made this summit possible. This event doesn't just happen overnight, and it's the result of months of planning, coordination, and collaboration. So I want to give a huge thank you to our summit planning and organizing team. From the Maryland Legislative Coalition, Cecilia and Alex; from the Climate Justice Wing, Monica, Lori, and Dave; and from Sierra Club Lower Eastern Shore, Jackie; my colleague from Shore Rivers, Grace; and from the Mizrahi Family Foundation, Jennifer. Thank you all for all your help in making this together. And please, everyone, join me in giving a big virtual round of applause. This group has worked tirelessly to build a program that is thoughtful, ambitious, and deeply relevant, and I'm truly honored to work alongside them. Now, let's talk about what we have in store for today. Day two is focused on environmental protection and water quality, and we have a packed agenda. We'll hear from two keynote speakers, followed by 8 legislators presenting on more than 21 pieces of legislation. These bills will touch on everything from toxic chemicals and pollution prevention to ecosystem restoration, environmental justice, and clean water protections. To close out the day, we'll be joined by leaders from 3 of Maryland's major environmental agencies who will share their priorities for this session coming up. We're honored to have Secretaries McElwain from Maryland Department of the Environment, as well as Secretary Addix from Maryland Department of Agriculture joining us. So if yesterday gave us the big picture of climate and energy framework, today is all about how all that connects to our land, our water, our food, and our systems and our communities. Now, with a few important reminders for today. This program is being recorded, as you heard when you logged on. We'll have the posting available on the Maryland Legislative Coalition's website, usually by the end of the week coming up. If you miss anything or want to get back and rewatch a session, you'll be able to do that. It's important, closed captioning is available. If you'd like to use that feature, just click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We also want this to be interactive, so you'll see polls pop up throughout the day, and we encourage you to participate in those and also the information that the advocates will share throughout the chat. We have a Q&A function open, so please use it. Ask questions as they come up to you, and depending on the timing, we'll try to get to some of those live, and if not, the presenters and the advocates will hang out and answer those in the Q&A. I also want to encourage our advocates, if you have links, fact sheets, bill numbers, or your contact information for how people can get involved, drop that info into the chat. The summit is about learning, but it's also about taking action. An important reminder, you can adjust your Zoom screen. So if you happen to just be seeing the presenter and not the slideshow, up in the right-hand corner of your Zoom box, you can hit the view and change that to maybe a side-by-side or gallery view. And if you're on an iPhone or an iPad, try swiping right to see if that changes the views. I want to point out that at 3 o'clock, we're going to take a 5-minute break, so hang with us until then. And now, just stepping back for a moment, I just want to point out that this legislative session is shaping up to be a big one. We're seeing rising urgency around water quality, toxic contamination, climate resilience, and public health. Communities across Maryland are grappling with flooding, heat, harmful chemicals, and failing infrastructure, all while trying to keep costs down and protect the most vulnerable people in our population. What makes this summit so important is that it gives us a preview of what's coming, and more importantly, a chance to understand it, shape it, and show up for it. So, whether you're a longtime advocate, a policy professional, a concerned resident, or just trying to learn more about how these decisions affect your community, thank you for being here. So grab your notebook, refill your coffee, and let's get comfortable while we settle in for today, as we've got a full and powerful day ahead. Kicking off today, I'm excited to introduce a colleague of mine, Ted Evangenitis from the Lower Susquehanna Riverkeeper. Ted is a part alliance builder, part diplomat, part educator, and when necessary, an unrelenting voice and defender of our rights for clean water in the Lower Susquehanna River and throughout the Chesapeake Bay. He uses education, scientific monitoring, pollution patrols, partnerships, public engagement, research, any tool possible, including legal action, to protect and restore the Susquehanna River's waterways. Ted's going to talk to us about a historic settlement agreement that just happened at the end of last year on the Conowingo Dam licensing. And I want to point out this topic is so unique. Just as this summit touches on climate and environment in day one and two, a lot of our work, especially as river keepers, is at that intersection of climate change and water quality. And this is an important reminder as you hear Ted talk about how fighting for climate doesn't mean that we have to give up water quality protections and our right today for clean water. So with that, Ted, I'm going to turn it over to you, man, and go ahead and get started.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot. I want to thank everyone for joining today. Conowingo Dam and what's happened here over the last, say, 16 years is certainly not a 10-minute conversation, but I'm going to do my best to pack in a lot of really good information in the next 10 minutes. So bear with me as we go and dive into a lot of the inner workings of the settlement agreement and what's just happened here. I just want to start out too, to talk about. I'm sure you guys had a really good day yesterday talking about other energy projects. This is Conowingo Dam. This is a hydroelectric facility. Hydro is different from other facilities in that we know that hydro is considered a renewable source of energy. However, with that comes a lot of impacts to the river, to the Chesapeake Bay, to the environment, to the ecology of the river. Um, and so we'll get into that here. So we'll get into why it matters. We'll get into a little brief history about the dam reconsideration process, which we just went through, and just an overview of the conclusion of that and the settlement agreement and the new water quality certification. Next slide. Okay, so why it matters. Conowingo Dam, this dam has been around for a very long time. It was constructed back in 1928. And what happens with hydroelectric dams and even nuclear as well, most of the time they're not going to run on a 5-year permit like we see NIPD's permits and those sorts of permits. These licenses they operate for anywhere from 25 years to 50 years. And in this case for Conowingo, we're looking at a 50-year license. So ever since the dam was built, it has altered flows. Obviously, if you can see a massive dam, it's going to alter flows. It's also going to block fish, shad, herring, and eels, and other migratory fish. Our aquatic habitat, the dam fundamentally alters the ecology of the river. Obviously, with that force there, it's going to stop flow. It's going to impede flow and damage aquatic habitats. Our shellfish, before the Conowingo Dam was built, we can probably assume that there were millions of mussels per river mile without all of the other hydroelectric dams as well. Today, we're lucky to see a couple, mussels per river mile. And that is an effect from the Conowingo Dam and other dams along the Susquehanna. We're also, obviously the dam kills fish through its turbines, and it obviously disrupts the natural timing and delivery of sediment transport down the Susquehanna River. Next slide. So, like I was just saying, the sediment portion of this is a very big deal. I know a lot of folks down in Maryland, and especially those on the Eastern Shore, are very concerned about sediment pollution and what's happening behind this dam. So, over the last 50 years, there hasn't really been any sort of best management practices being put in place, such as dredging. So, over time, the dam has accumulated sediments and pollutants which stack behind it. And what we see is when we get storm events that, depending upon the flow, scour will occur and it will deliver sediments, nutrients, and other pollution downstream to the Susquehanna River and ultimately to the Chesapeake Bay, especially the upper Chesapeake Bay. Next slide. And these are just a couple pictures here. The other one may or may not load, but you can see there's a debris field, a lot of trash and debris, also stockpiles behind the dam. Constellation Energy, who owns the dam, they remove trash and debris on a regular basis. So we'll get into that here in a second as well. Next slide. And if you were to go back a slide before, you would have seen, some of the crest gates open up, and we'll see that now. The scour threshold has changed over the years. So let's say 15 years ago, the scour threshold would have been, in a cubic feet per second flow, maybe 400,000 cubic feet per second. Now we're seeing scour events happen at a much less, as far as intensity goes of the river and flow. We might see it at maybe 150 or 175 cubic feet per second, and we'll see those scour events happen. So, brief history about Conowingo Dam and some of the relicensing. So I mentioned that the dam was constructed in 1928. And in 2009, the dam was up for relicense in 2014. And part of a hydro dam relicensing, it's called the integrated licensing process. And so the dam owner, regulatory bodies, state agencies, NGOs, the public, 5 years before the dam is up for relicense, there will be an opportunity for the public and everyone else to suggest studies. So do we want to study fish passage and to see, how many fish get upriver, or looking at, dredging scenarios and things like that. So 2009 is when our organization got involved in this, and we became part of the process. We suggested different studies to the dam owner and to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So that was the point in time that we got involved. And the state of Maryland wanted a study to get done. They wanted a sediment transport study to show what's happening throughout all of these lower Susquehanna River dams and how is sediment being transported from these dams and then ultimately to the Chesapeake Bay. However, the dam owner refused to do that study, and so in 2014, Maryland they decided to not issue a water quality certification for the dam because that study was not completed. So there were a couple years that went back and forth where Exelon submitted a water quality certification request, and Maryland did not fulfill it until that sediment study was completed, which eventually it was completed in 2016. Next slide. So once Maryland got the study, they were able to issue the water quality certification, which that happened in 2018. We reviewed the water quality certification. We saw it was pretty good, except it didn't really address dredging. It didn't really address mitigating the impacts of scour and mitigating the impacts of how all of these nutrients and sediments are reaching the Chesapeake Bay. Our organization in Waterkeepers Chesapeake, we filed an administrative appeal, and also the dam owners also did as well. And fast forwarding to 2019, considering our challenges and the dam owners' challenges, the dam owner and the state winded up going behind closed doors. They crafted a settlement agreement that did not even come close to some of the provisions in the water quality certification and was really woefully inadequate to address the harms and impacts of the dam. And so I think we can go to the next slide. What the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission did was they took that settlement agreement and they inserted it into the federal license for the dam for the next 50 years. The settlement agreement was an unlawful agreement. It was basically they tried to wish away the water quality certification and tried to do away with the work that was already done. And again, a lot of the provisions in it did not meet water quality standards, and did not meet Federal Power Act regulations and statutes. So our organization, once that license was issued by FERC, our organization challenged that license in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, and eventually the court agreed with us and they vacated the license, and remanded it back down to FERC. So what that left was the state dealing with those administrative appeals from back in 2018. So what happened next was we all met and we came into we went into a mediation, and for about a year and a half, we discussed all of the issues at Conowingo and came together to craft a settlement agreement that addressed water quality standards, that addressed fish passage, that addressed dredging, that addressed trash and debris, and many other facets and pieces of this. We can go to the next slide. And bear with me here. I know I'm approaching time, but give me about one more minute or two. So, the state of Maryland, before the mediation process, they took information from partners, from NGOs, from the public, to better inform themselves. Again, since there was some time between 2018 and 2023, it was a good idea for them to look at new information. Next slide. So basically, our mediation concluded. We have a new water quality certification, and that water quality certification has been submitted to FERC. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission will be either approving that water quality certification and issuing a license, or they will deny it, which we hope they don't do, but that's always the case. So we are very confident we have a really good water quality certification, and we should see FERC approve this. Next slide. There might be a picture there missing if you can't see it, but we have trash and debris removal estimated at $77.8 million. We also have water quality resiliency initiatives that valued at $87.6 million. Next slide. Dredging. We have dredging in our water quality certification and settlement agreement, which is historic. We wouldn't have gotten that if it wasn't for Waterkeepers Chesapeake and Lower Susquehanna Riverkeeper. We also have wildlife passage. We also have freshwater mussel restoration. You can go to the next slide. I think you should capture that. And we also have invasive species management valued at $9.4 million. And again, I said freshwater mussel restoration valued at $23.3 million. So unfortunately, we did suffer an administrative appeal. The Clean Chesapeake Coalition filed a administrative appeal on the water quality certification and settlement. We actively, between the state, my partners at Waterkeepers Chesapeake, and myself, we actively engaged with public officials, county officials from the counties that were part of that appeal, and we were able to work with them and to address the issues that they had. And later on January 2nd, that appeal was officially withdrew. So we're very happy about that. We know that if an appeal did go through, this would have upended and delayed very, very important investments for clean water. Next slide, and I think that might be it. But I do want to end with just a note to say that hydroelectric dam relicensing is very complex. Obviously, in this case, it took us 16 years to get to a final agreement, but we as the people and as NGOs and as residents, especially in a community where a project is happening, we have the ability to be part of the process, and to really allow ourselves to suggest studies and to make sure that in this case, it's a 50-year license. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So for the public to be involved is crucially important so that water quality is restored and that provisions and conditions are in place to further protect our water and protect our communities from pollution.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ted. And I want to apologize for the technical issues with the photos there. We'll update those photos for when we post this presentation to the website so everyone can see the graphics that you were talking about. Real quick, what does moving forward look like? Are you going to be helping to oversee this? Are you going to be,
Yes.
yeah, what does that look
Yeah,
like?
thanks. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, that's the biggest piece now. So there's a lot of provisions in the license in the forthcoming license that we will have a seat at the table. So for example, all of the investments that are going to be coming into the state, looking at what kind of projects will the state complete over the years. So we'll be at the table making sure that the projects are sound and that that the monies are going to be put towards the best bang for the buck projects, and making sure that the state is fulfilling their role in managing that money correctly and investing it where it should go. In addition to that, we have a lot to do on dredging. So obviously, I mentioned, I think it was 19 and change as far as millions of dollars are going to go to dredging. However, it's not going to be enough. We are going to need additional investments and resources for dredging. However, the pathway for dredging is there, and that's the most important piece, is that we have it, it's there. We need to get the studies done. We need to get the dredging experts involved. Land has to be secured, and further studies need to be done, but it's there. And we are very, very fortunate to have that there. And we're looking forward to working with folks in the regulatory industries and legislation and legislators in Maryland to make this happen. We know that the communities south of the dam are suffering, right? When the dam opens up this crest gates, you're getting pollution, you're getting sediments, fishing is shut down, beaches are littered, and oyster beds are smothered. We understand that. We're going to hopefully get to the point where those effects are mitigated, and we can have a cleaner Chesapeake Bay over the next 50 years.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all your work on this, Ted. As you said, this has been a decades-long fight for Lower Susquehanna Riverkeeper, and we appreciate you and your colleagues for staying in it as long as you have. I'll just say it resonates so well with the talk yesterday about nuclear energy and other energy sources, and these licenses are big. We've got to get involved as a community. You've got to stay on top of it, which takes a lot of work. And so, partnering with local groups like Riverkeeper organizations or other watershed groups is a great way to move that forward. So, Ted, thanks again. We do have a few questions in the chat about some funding and some dredging. If you have access to that and want to be able to grab that, we're going to move on to our next deep dive here, which is a switch in topics here, but really getting at another issue that's finding its way to be impactful really throughout the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. And so, joining me today is a colleague of mine again, Brent Walls, the Upper Potomac Riverkeeper. Brent has served in this role since joining Potomac Riverkeeper Network in 2009, defending the public's right to clean water and holding polluters accountable under the Clean Water Act. With a background in environmental science and freshwater ecology, Brent brings a powerful scientific lens to river advocacy, strengthening enforcement actions, and supporting watershed groups across the region. Today, Brent will take a deep dive on PFAS, the so-called class of forever chemicals that are now showing up virtually everywhere in our communities. And so Brent's going to give us the education and the deep dive on it, and then we're going to lead into some legislation that's going to focus on it. So, Brent, thanks for being here.
Sounds good, Matt. Thank you. And thank you for all the organizers putting this together and everyone that's showing up today. I also want to give a real quick shout out to Ted. Amazing work by him and all the other advocates and legal minds. It was an animal, and just congratulations, kudos to you, Ted, and keep on it and keep at it. So, hi everyone. My name is Brent Walls, your Upper Potomac Riverkeeper. I've been doing PFAS issues since 2018. You can go to the next slide. And so this is kind of like my PFAS 101. I've been giving this spiel probably for the last 5 years, and really wanted to start out with history of PFAS, just to kind of really framework that it's been around for a very, very long time. Look, it was invented in 1938. Some of the really early markers, PTFE, and then PFOA and PFOS, probably some of the two components of PFAS that are the most well known, were invented in the 1940s. Scotchgard, if everybody remembers that, love to have a couch or piece of furniture that had Scotchgard because it was stain resistant. That was invented in the 1950s, and then again in the 1960s, a big one was AFFF, and adding PFAS to nonstick pans. So it's been around for a very, very long time. And as you can see, 50, 60, 70 years, and we're just now getting around to trying to figure out how we can stop PFAS from impacting our lives. Next slide. So what I always like to do is I like to start off with a little, what kind of chemical is PFAS? Because I think it's really important for a basis to understand the components of PFAS. Now, PFAS, PFAS, polyfluoroalkyl substances, is actually referencing a family of, I think the marker maybe is around 15,000 of these different chemicals, and they are, again, man-made. They're composed of long chains and short chains. Now, the longer the chain is considered more toxic, and that's PFOA and PFOS is probably one of the longer chains out there. And then, short chains are toxic, but they're just not as large. And there's some other properties they can move around a lot faster. And the larger chains can sometimes break down and degenerate into some of those shorter chains. So the nature of these chains, what does that mean? The fluorine and carbon bond is probably one of the strongest chemical bonds that's out there in nature. And it's almost impossible to break. And that's one of the reasons why it's called a forever chemical. The compound of all PFAS is made up of a head group and a tail group. Now, this is very, very important because the head group likes water. It also likes the different molecules that is being attached to, say, a nonstick pan. The tail group, well, it doesn't like fat and it doesn't like water. And that tail group brings about the waterproofing and the non-stick nature, like in pans. Now, the other property is heat resistant. It's almost impossible to heat these things to break them down. High foam surfactant, meaning that it loves to create foam. That's one of the reasons why it's an AFFF. Insulator and obviously repellent and waterproofing. And the other thing too is these short chain compounds like Gen X, if they're in the same environment of other short chain compounds, they can become longer chain compounds. Next slide. So again, what kind of pollution is PFAS? It's another thing to really consider. Bioaccumulation is the key word. It bioaccumulates in our bodies. It likes to attach to the proteins in our blood and in our tissues. So bioaccumulation is like the three little fish. If they're in the same environment and as they get older, they slowly accumulate PFAS or other toxins in their bodies over time. Biomagnification is a little bit different. A fish is eaten by a bigger fish. That bigger fish is eaten by another fish, which is eaten by another animal. So that's biomagnification. So the PFAS that's in our bodies or in other species has typically a 7-year half-life. So that means if you were not exposed at all to PFAS right now, no more, then in 7 years, half of that PFAS that's in your body is going to be excreted out. Now, the other big thing is that PFAS doesn't break down in the environment. There's no natural microbial processes in the soil that naturally break it down. There's a lot of other pollutants out there that do not move very far, and they get broken down by microbial action. Now, PFAS can degrade into shorter chains through the soil, so they can break off. The little tails can break off and become shorter chains, and those shorter chains are pretty mobile. And like I'd said before, it's known to reform in an environment where there's other shorter chains, so like in wastewater treatment plants. Now, the other unique thing about PFAS is it does, because it likes water and plants suck up water from the ground, it'll absorb into plants. It'll absorb into leafy plants and crops like soybean and hay. It'll also absorb into the corn stalk itself, maybe not necessarily the corn kernels as much, but into the corn stalk. And that corn stalk a lot of times is turned around and fed as silage to our grazing animals. The other thing about PFAS is because it likes water, one end of it likes water, it can really easily move to the ground. And so it can move through the subsurface and into our groundwater quite easily. And again, like it accumulates in us, it can also accumulate in the aquatic species. And then when we eat those species, then we biomagnify into our system. Next slide. So what are the health risks of PFAS? Well, you have to think about it real quick before we get into the health risks. It's a big molecule. It's not a small, it's a big molecule. And when you have a big molecule attaching to the proteins in our bodies, which is in our tissues, in our blood cells, that's going to cause problems to a number of different systems in our bodies. And so that's one of the reasons why it's linked to high cholesterol, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, birth defects, ADHD, and there's a whole another suite of other health elements that PFAS is linked to. And essentially, we all have some level of PFAS in our system. I know I have. I've been tested. My blood's been tested. I do have a mid-range level of PFAS in my system from my exposure, especially being in the service. Next slide. So how are we exposed to PFAS and chemicals? I think that's the big one. Well, there's a primary and a secondary exposure. Primary exposure is drinking water. That is the number one, and that's one of the reasons why the country and the federal government and a lot of the state governments have focused on public drinking water to try and remove the PFAS from that and remove that as a primary exposure. Unfortunately, there's no mechanism to do that in private wells. However, that is another primary source for those who have private wells that are concerned about your drinking water. Food products, milk, beer, seafood, vegetables, these are all contaminated through either milking of the cattle or watering the cattle, feeding the cattle from the various different feeds, and that gets into the cattle and into the milk, and then, like I'd said, into the seafood. and then even to the leafy vegetables that we eat. Now, unfortunately, if all those beer drinkers out there, if you read some of the reports, yes, there's been a number of different beer companies that have found PFAS in their beer, and so Google that and to find out what if it's in your brand or not. Secondary exposure is essentially how we're exposed um, through other means, like the fast food restaurants that have packaged their food into waterproofing package. Cookware, your nonstick pans, your Tefal pans, just about any nonstick pan out there has some form of PFAS. I think there's a few that are coming out that actually don't, which is kind of unique. Inhalation, household dust. So all those carpets and rugs and furniture that we have in our house that are stain resistant, well, that produces dust, and we inhale that dust, and therefore we inhale PFAS. Likewise, for ag workers that are out in the fields using biosolids or other pesticides and herbicides, they're going to be inhaling that dust as well, being exposed to PFAS. And then there's a lot of waterproof cosmetics, waterproof sunscreen. If you are out in the sun and you don't want to burn and you put on that waterproof sunscreen, you're exposing yourself to PFAS. Next slide. So how do you comprehend PFAS levels? And that's a really, really important part because you're going to hear terms like parts per trillion and parts per billion. So parts per trillion means like one drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized pools. So that one drop is 1 parts per trillion compared to 20, the amount of water in 20 Olympic-sized pools. Now, parts per billion means there's 1,000 parts per billion for 1 parts per trillion. And that's a really important distinction because there are some uses of both these terms. Now, the EPA drinking water MCLs, maximum contaminant levels, were put out there not too long ago. Now, the health risk was set at 0 parts per trillion or 0.004 parts per trillion, way below, almost 1,000 below parts per trillion. But since our labs and everything else out there really can't test to that small level, they set PFOA and PFOS to 4 parts per trillion, and these other three PFAS to 10 parts per trillion. Now, concentrations of soil is a little bit different because it's measured in parts per billion because of the transfer of parts per billion in the soil and how it gets into our bodies through that process. And the EPA came out with a draft risk assessment of biosolids in January 2025, but just a draft at 1 parts per billion PFOA and PFOS and PFOA. Next slide. So sources of PFAS, where are they? What are they? Military sites and airports, those are the primary hot spots because of the use of AFFF. Wastewater, all wastewater has some level of PFAS, whether it's an industrial because they're using the chemicals specifically, or even on our public domestic waste streams, because a lot of the products we use in our homes every single day have PFAS that are adding to the problem. Biosolids, sewage sludge from wastewater treatment plants is another source of PFAS, and it's usually concentrated because it's separating from the effluent that's getting discharged in our streams from the treatment plant, concentrated into sludge. Landfills, the leachate, all these products we throw to landfill, even some of the sludge and biosolids go to the landfill. That has a leachate. That leachate has PFAS in it. Pesticides and herbicides are another big source. And contamination of water sources, it's happening. Rivers and streams from the runoff, from point source discharges, groundwater, it's leaching from all these different sources into the ground and impacting our private wells. Next slide. So how do we fight PFAS? Well, we have to identify it. We have to identify where it is, how bad it is, so that we can start working on stopping these various different sources. And now we know where the sources are. We just need detailed information of exactly where and how bad. We have to source the hotspots, military airports, manufacturing sites, residential household products with PFAS, like I mentioned before. We need to require pre-treatment of these industrial sources that discharge into our public sewer system. because that's contaminated our public sewer system to a higher degree, on top of what we're already flushing down the toilet from our residential homes. Then we have a non-point source, and those non-point source of biosolids, pesticides, herbicides, spray irrigation of wastewater, contaminated groundwater. We have to invest, and we are investing. We're already investing in the treatment technology in our drinking water plants, but we need to invest in the technology in our wastewater treatment plants. Unfortunately, that creates a waste stream that goes to the landfill. All those filter mechanisms is another source of pollution that has to go somewhere, and typically it goes to a landfill. So we're just kind of recreating another cycle. But ultimately, what we need to do is destroy PFAS, destroy those carbon and fluorine bonds. And the technology is out there. It's just not cheap, and it's not able to be used at such large volumes. And we have to do all of this so that we can protect human and environmental health. We have drinking water standards that were put out in 2024. MD's done a great job in putting out fish consumption advisory standards in 2023. And we're hoping that ambient water quality standards will move forward at some point down the road. But that what means, what are the levels of PFAS need to be in our rivers and streams so that we're not contaminating our aquatic species. Next slide. So biosolids is kind of what I want to focus on at the end of the last few slides here, and really kind of hone in on what is biosolids. It is sludge from our treatment plants. And how does PFAS get into that sludge? From industry, from landfills, from all the products we use in our homes. It goes into these treatment plants. It gets filtered and separated. Now, our treatment plants are only there to really remove the solids and treat for bacteria. And by removing the solids, we're also removing a lot of the metals as well. But we're not removing anything else. We really don't have the filtration systems to do that. Now, we do have some ENR systems that's removing some nutrients, but all of those other things that are in the waste stream are being concentrated in the biosolids, like PFAS. And then PFAS in the biosolids, the sludge, is either taken to a landfill or put on our farm fields. And when it is on our farm fields, the PFAS can easily leach into the groundwater, can run off into our streams, can be absorbed by the agricultural workers, can be consumed by the cows, can be uptaken by the crops and plants that are grown there. Next slide. So we asked a lot of questions about biosolids. What are the levels of PFAS in biosolids? And, you know, we've had those answered. MDE's done a fabulous job in answering some of those questions as to what the levels are. Where are the biosolids applied? That was a much more unique kind of situation. We had to really go into the records and find out, where are they all being applied? Is it how close to a stream? Is it concentrated in one area? What are the wells, private wells that are located next to it? So we really had to map that out. Are streams impacted by biosolids? Yes, they are. And in fact, my organization, along with Waterkeeper Alliance and other river keepers across the nation, did test many sites and locations that are above and downstream a runoff from a farm field that used biosolids, and did show in every single case there was an increase in PFAS levels. What kind of crops are most impacted by PFAS? There's a lot of research out there, and I've already talked a little bit about that. We can go to the next slide. So, you know, there's a lot of, here's a nice little scale of the accumulation of PFAS in various different products that are grown in our gardens or in our farms. The lowest level is grains. However, there is PFAS that are getting into those grains. And as you go up and the vegetables become more leafy, then there's a greater amount of PFAS in there. And those grains and silage get fed to our cattle and to our milking cows, and that then goes to our tables. So we really had to kind of dig down, what does this all mean? And we had some other information about the direct field grazing, 30-day hold on grazing after biocide application, but only 30 days. They can still graze those cows and cattle on the biocide applied field. And then you have Class A and Class B. Class B, really the differences between the two is pathogens and dryness. They're Class A biosolids, and sometimes is referred to bloom in one particular case. That is sold commercially to not just farmers but also to residents. That has very, very low levels of pathogenic bacteria and extremely dry, but it still has PFAS in it. Class B is a lot wetter and has a few more pathogens, but it is, and then that's typically what's applied to farm fields. Next slide. So it really takes a coalition, and it has taken a coalition to really address PFAS. In 2019, our organization and a lot of other advocates started to express our concern with the MDE and other state agencies about PFAS. Now, Maryland, I have to commend Maryland. They really have responded to our concerns over the past few years. In 2023, they did a whole lot of work from 21 to 22 to 23 to sample all kinds of different locations across the state, and they came up with fish consumption advisors for PFAS. Probably one of the first states on the East Coast to do so statewide. Also in 2023, the MD started requesting wastewater facilities to test for PFAS. And then later in 2024, we found that, we really need to know what is in our waste streams, what is in the biosolids, and then MD decided to mandate PFAS testing. And now we have at least 2 years of information, what's in our wastewater streams and what's in our biosolids. And that's what also has helped us come up with a more focused biosolid bill for this year. And speaking of legislation, 2022, we started this adventure out with the George Walter Taylor Act, banning AFFF, food packaging, PFAS, rugs and carpets that have PFAS in it. 2024, the Protecting Waters from PFAS Pollution Act, and that was really pre-treatment, looking at the sources before it gets into our public waste streams that use PFAS and try to eliminate that and filter it out. And then last year we attempted to do a biosolids bill. We were very ambitious, and we were not successful, and so that's why we worked really hard the end of 2025 and into 2026 to work with advocates, to work with MDE, to work with utilities, work with other legislators, have all these different group sessions, and come out of those group sessions with a better understanding of what we needed to really do to address biosolids in the state of Maryland, and also PFAS in general. And so we focused on biosolid bill and then a product phase out bill.
Yeah.
I think next slide, and I think I'm done.
I think that brings us to the end, Brent, but that was a jam-packed with information on this, critically important chemical that is showing up everywhere. As you pointed out, I mean, those images speak 1,000 words just because of how this stuff moves through the environment, moves through our body, moves through, everything that we're dealing with. And I just want to question, or, actually someone as personal as you who has it tested. You've had it tested in you, you have it in you. You've been in the military, and so you feel like that may have been a pathway. But like, do you see a future where these chemicals aren't an issue for us?
I think I see a future to where we're going to minimize the amount that is out there. There's still always going to be some level of PFAS, just like PCBs have been in areas of our watershed for the last 30, 40 years. We're still going to have those residual sources of PFAS and still be addressing those. But I think as we slowly work at the sources, the big sources, we're going to reduce our levels to super low levels, to where we can utilize biosolids, to where we can actually drink the water, not fearful of it. But it's going to be a long time before we get to that point.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And there's a few questions in the chat or in the Q&A, if you don't mind heading over there and
Yep.
answering. We're going to get moving into actually one of two pieces of legislation that take into consideration this PFAS chemical and the impact it's having. And the first one is getting right at that point that you made about biosolids. And so it's really my pleasure to introduce our next speaker here, Senator Sarah Love. Senator Love has represented District 16th since 2019, a senator now, and in most before that as delegate since 2019. where she served on the Environment and Transportation Committee. Also notable is her, I guess, previous chair position on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Just after the end of the year, you cycled off that, but you're the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, which is a tri-state body that's working on policy across the Chesapeake Bay, which is really, really good. And I'll just say, Senator Love has a proven track record of turning environmental priorities into enforceable law. We saw the George Walter Taylor Act, which was her piece of legislation, as well as some that I've had the privilege to work with you on, including the Clean Water Justice Act and I would say, the most notable named bill, the Zombie Permit Bill, way back when, which was a lot of fun working on that. But today she's going to talk to us about how we can protect our communities, especially our rural communities, from PFAS contamination through the use of biosolids as a fertilizer. And so, Senator, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to get started on this topic.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate that introduction and the invitation to be here today. If it's all right, I'm actually going to kick it to Betsy Nicholas from the Potomac Waterkeepers Network, and then I will follow on Betsy.
Sounds great, Senator. Thank you. And my colleague Brent Walls took a lot of what I was going to say, so I can be relatively short here, especially since you got two lawyers presenting here. We can always be dangerous in this way. But I really want this to make sense from a practical level. We're throwing a lot of terms and technical information at people, and it can get overwhelming. One just note on all of the conversions that Brent mentioned before about parts per billion, parts per trillion, then you get into micrograms per liter and all of these things. I have to look at a cheat sheet for those to understand them. So we can help you make one. You can take one from our materials. So don't get overwhelmed by those aspects of this, because unfortunately, this is something that impacts us all. PFAS chemicals, as you just heard, have been around for a very long time. And the toxicity of them has been known since probably the 1950s and 60s, depending on what industries and what particular PFAS sets of chemicals. There are about 15,000 of these chemicals out there. So we are behind the ball right now on trying to get a handle on this problem, particularly with them being used in so many consumer products. So just going through this diagram a little bit, industries started initially using PFAS because of the waterproofing capabilities on it. So anytime you have something like a plastic wrapper that you get your fast food in, and it doesn't get that giant grease stain on it, or it keeps it sealed inside, that's PFAS that's doing that for you. When you microwave popcorn and you got that sort of shiny, slippery film on the inside, that's PFAS. But it goes much further than that as well. Most cosmetics, again, for the same reason, have PFAS in them, so that they're, again, if you put a foundation on your face so that it sticks to your skin, but shields oil from coming out, and it itself becomes waterproof on your skin. Same with different types of clothing, any waterproof clothes, cookware, as was referenced before. All of these consumer products then are getting, in various ways, from our ingestion to our use of them, put in both landfills and going into wastewater treatment plants from our own consumption of these and the use and flow through our body. And that gives us an opportunity to stop them before they get further out into the environment. That's what we're really looking to do here, because it's a centralized location that puts them all together, both at landfills and at wastewater treatment plants, where we can then say, we're going to keep it from going beyond here. Stop it at the source, which can also mean stopping it at the industry. So Senator Love's bill that she worked on 2 years ago, and she'll probably talk about a little bit more on pre-treatment, was really focused at stopping it at that industrial level. So before it gets to the wastewater treatment plant. And that's an authority that wastewater treatment plants have. They can say either, we're not taking your discharge because we don't have the capabilities to properly treat it, or say, you industry have to filter this out some way before we take your discharge. And that's what that bill sought to help them do in some other ways that the senator can explain to you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a process that Senator Love undertook with many, many great participants for the entirety of the summer and even into the fall, of work groups discussing these issues with wastewater treatment plants, MDE, and all of these different folks moving along together on these issues. And I just wanted to quickly flag a couple of things that we heard from wastewater treatment plants in particular, that they were passive receivers. True, they don't make the PFAS, but a wastewater treatment plant's entire purpose is to treat pollution. That's why they're there in the first place. They didn't make the E. coli that comes in with managing waste or any of those other things either. So that I don't think is a compelling reason for not doing something about it. And some confusion around background levels of PFAS. There are no background levels of PFAS. PFAS is only a man-made chemical. It doesn't exist in nature. So where you find existing PFAS, it is a pollutant, it is a toxic pollutant, and it was put there through various man-made processes. So again, Senator Love is working on a bill that will try and stop this at the source before land application. And I just want to give you a tiny bit of explanation about that. That for many decades, partially treated sewage sludge, also referred to by the industry as biosolids, have been used as fertilizer. And they dispose of this sewage sludge by land applying it, generally on farm fields, but not exclusively so. What this has the effect of doing is taking concentrated PFAS and dispersing it widely into rural communities. So often the high volumes of sewage sludge are coming from big urban areas. More people, more poop. And then that is driven out to farm fields and applied on those farm fields. And unfortunately, it is laden with PFAS that is then uptaken by plants, runs off into the streams and groundwater wells, and contaminates the soil, which will impact whatever crops or animals are then grazing there. And this bill aims to help stop that problem that will just keep spreading this around and continuing the PFAS uptake cycle. And I will now hand it over to you, Senator Love.
Thanks, Betsy. Excuse me. And I really want to thank River Keepers and Shore Rivers and all of the other environmental groups that have worked on this, because it really, as Brent said early on, it really has been a community effort. We've had watermen, we've had farmers, we've had advocates, a whole host of people coming out to talk about this really important issue. And PFAS has gotten more and more notice over the years, which is good, because the more people know about it and the more people understand it, the more pressure we can build to regulate it. So just a 2-second background, as Matt mentioned, I'm on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I've been on that commission for about 7 years now. And it was through that commission, and also the fact that my niece's husband is a firefighter, that I learned about PFAS. And so my entire career in the legislature, I've been working on it. I had a bill to ban the use of PFAS in firefighting foam in testing and training. We passed that legislation. Then we moved on, as Matt mentioned, to the George Walter Taylor Act. George Walter Taylor was a firefighter at Patuxent Naval Base who died of PFAS-related cancer. And that bill was really the first one in the nation that pulled in a lot of what other states were doing. So we banned it in firefighting foam. We had a notice for when PFAS was in firefighting gear. We banned it in food packaging, and we banned it in rugs and carpets. And we also directed the Maryland Department of the Environment to come up with a PFAS action plan. So with those two pieces of legislation, we're starting to stop it from going into the environment. The next piece of legislation, as Betsy mentioned, was taking a more upstream view. So we were looking at those significant industrial users, having the wastewater treatment plants and the Maryland Department of Environment to look upstream, figure out who those significant industrial users were that were using this PFAS, so we can again start to get it out of the waste stream. Last year, as was mentioned, we had the biosolids bill, and we're bringing it back again this year. I have two PFAS bills this year, the biosolids bill, and then a bill that Delegate Sheila Ruth will present later on phasing out the use of PFAS in a number of products. As Betsy mentioned, last year the wastewater treatment plants complained that they weren't making this stuff, so it wasn't their fault that they had it, that we didn't have enough information about the levels of PFAS. And it would cost a huge amount of money if they had to remediate that PFAS. So we've come back with these two bills, one saying, okay, we're going to stop it at the source. You're saying, it's not your fault, it's in the wastewater. We're going to get it out of the environment upstream. So that's the product bill that Delegate Ruth will talk about. And then this bill that I'm bringing with Delegate Dana Stein in the House, as Betsy mentioned, really targets the application of this material, the biosolids, on our agricultural land. So the output of these wastewater treatment plants and trying to make sure that we're not poisoning the farmland from which we get our food. And it was, I'll be honest, exceedingly disappointing last session, the pushback that we got, but we've had incredible participation over the summer. I will say that I used to joke that it wasn't a day if we didn't have a PFAS meeting. We had 5 different work groups. We had one on the testing of the biosolids and the timelines. When could those tests be returned? We had one on the costs that it would take to remediate the biosolids and where possible funding could come from. We had one on technology and the latest and greatest on the destruction, and then one on the product bill and one on the biosolids bill. And we had, as Betsy mentioned, just a huge group of people that were dedicated to that. And we learned a lot. Matt, I see you're on there. So I'll stop in a moment. We learned a lot through that, and we really crafted this piece of legislation. You can see it there, the tiered approach to merge not only the numbers that we see from our wastewater treatment plant, the biosolids with PFAS in them, and also the health effects, and come up with something that was really reasonable. So if the biosolids were over 50 parts per billion, there's absolutely no land application allowed. Between that 25 and 50, they have to work with the Maryland Department of the Environment on a mitigation plan. So perhaps they have to stop land applying for a little while. Perhaps they have to do setbacks from water sources, a number of other things that they have to do, look upstream and figure out where that PFAS is coming from. I encourage everybody to come out and support this bill. We are getting huge pushback. The nation, I am not exaggerating, the nation is actually looking at us. So trade groups are pushing hard on Maryland because they don't want any regulations on PFAS. So I'll stop there. Thank you all so much. And thanks for all your advocacy.
Yeah.
Matt, back to you.
Thank you, Senator. And really, thanks for your continuous effort on this issue. As you explained, you've really taken a comprehensive approach at addressing PFAS from its source to its impact in the environment and really the impact to the community. And so it's a real demonstration of how we solve and make systematic change on a really big issue. And so I just want to thank you for continuing to do that. We do have a question in the chat. If you don't mind going to the Q&A and you and Betsy can maybe help answer that one. And we're going to get moving because we've got about 20 more pieces of legislation we want to cover with everyone today. So I'm excited. Our next speaker is Delegate Baylor. Baylor is new to the General Assembly as of last year. He represents District 30A and is on the House Environment and Transportation Committee, including its Energy Subcommittee. He previously worked as the legislative aide at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, bringing firsthand experience in environmental policy to his role. And he was the chief of staff of a very well-known senator in Maryland, Senator Elfreth, who is now representing us on the national level. In just a short time, Delegate Baylor has already made a major impact, sponsoring and supporting more than 20 bills that became law in 2025, including the Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act, the Endangered and Threatened Species Act, and multiple wildlife protection measures. And so we've got about two or three bills here that Delegate Baylor is going to talk to us about. And Delegate, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Excited to join you all from this angle and not from the DNR angle anymore. So it's an honor to join you all. I will try to be as quick as possible because I have three different bills to try and get through. And with that, we'll start to roll right through it. And I see Gary Allen has joined us as well. So we will start with the Forest Stewardship Act. You can go to the next slide. So taking kind of a high level view, I think, firstly, the really exciting news in Maryland that all of you know, and thanks to the leadership of folks like Senator Love, is we have made incredible progress over the last few years on ensuring that we're retaining and preserving our forest land in the state of Maryland. Thanks to Senator Love and Senator Elfreth when she was in the state Senate, and many of the advocates on this call, we were able to pass an updated Forest Conservation Act, as long as many other pieces of legislation to ensure that we are really focusing on saving the trees. But with that, there are a few other things that we know. Firstly, we know that we still continue to lose private land and private forest cover at an increasing rate. And hopefully with the updated Forest Conservation Act, we can begin to lower that loss. But there are more steps that we can take to mitigate that. And at the same time as that, we also know that not all forest land is created equal. That some forest land possesses a better ecological value for our environment. So the Forest Stewardship Act that Gary has helped put together kind of tries to address both of those points. I'll walk high level through the legislation and then allow Gary to walk through it as well. But firstly, and arguably the most exciting part of the legislation for me, is that it will define ecosystem services in Maryland law for the first time. So that way we can really start to define and start to unravel and put into law that not all forest land and ecosystems are created equally. And by defining it, what we'll be able to do is ensure that we are really prioritizing our conservation efforts on land and work and restoration that is really going to create the best ecosystem value for our communities. And in that vein, the legislation will also provide financial incentives to private landowners to conserve forest land that has that highest ecological value. And it is going to ensure that we are creating programs and ensuring that these incentives are creating generational commitments to the preservation of that forest land. So with that, I'm excited to sponsor this legislation and begin the conversation about ecosystem services and about further preservation of our forest land here in the state. But I do also want to turn it over to Gary to see if he has anything to add as well.
Thank you very much, Delegate Byer, and thank you very much for being the lead sponsor in this legislation in the House. Friends, the Maryland Forestry Foundation is very pleased to be associated with this legislation. It promises to be, if passed, one of the most significant pieces of forestry legislation in over 20 years. Actually, other than the forest conservation upgrades itself passed several years ago, it could be the most significant piece of forestry legislation. Almost everyone, when they talk about the benefits of trees, talk about the ecological services of trees as a part of every presentation they make. For the first time, this piece of legislation would define those ecological services as public benefits and say that they're the kinds of things we want to strengthen, encourage, and expand on Maryland's landscape. And we want to do so in the context, as Delegate pointed out, in those services that have the highest ecological value. So we want to attach monetized values to those services. And we want to encourage the landowners, which own about 70% of the forest resource in Maryland, to preserve and protect those, which is why we call it the Stewardship Act. So it has a specific landowner focus in the legislation. In a pilot phase, which the bill also articulates, we begin to look at how those benefits can be incentivized for the next generation between now and 2050. So for those folks that want to develop a new forest conservation plan that prioritizes the preservation of the articulated ecological services, we want to provide a financial incentive. And so there is established by this fund a new ecological services fee and a new ecological services fund in the thing. Because this anticipates a significant kind of fiscal impact, we're not totally optimistic that in the current fiscal climate, all of this can be successful the first time out. But I'm very pleased that the delegate has taken this on in an election year because it's our feeling, and frankly, he's willing to lead on it, that these are the kinds of questions and issues that ought to be discussed about the future priorities for forest preservation, protection, and expansion in Maryland. So the creation of a fund to provide incentives for the next 20-year protection or 25-year protection of our forests is an immense step forward. And why I started out by saying this has the potential to be one of the most significant pieces of forestry legislation in a generation. Thank you, Delegate Byer, for your leadership on this issue. I'd be pleased to answer any additional questions. The bill has a lot of other strengths and details, and we look forward to its introduction and the conversations that will follow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And we have two other bills to get through, so I don't want to run over on time. So, Matt, could you go to the next slide? So the next bill or legislative concept that we want to talk about is related to noncompliance notifications and the Maryland Department of the Environment. So I do also want to give Senator Love another shout out here because she's been a part of these conversations, as well as Matt and Short Rivers as well. So I think firstly, just to kind of set the stage, as I said, with forest cover, Maryland has made some really remarkable strides over the last few years on increasing transparency in our environmental violations across the state. But what we all know is that we need to always do more to increase that transparency, and we know that our environmental laws are only as strong as they are enforced. One thing that Matt brought to Senator Love and my attention over the course of the interim was that there are some folks, even though we've made remarkable progress on ensuring that there is proper notification structures in place in law for significant noncompliance permits, there's still work to be done to ensure that list is reaching the local levels of government and also providing an opportunity for some amazing advocates like the folks on this call to be aware of those permits and significant noncompliance. So I'll allow Matt to walk through the specifics of the legislation, but I do think that this has an opportunity to really increase our transparency, ensure that there's better awareness in our community communities and at every level of government for permits that are in need of being addressed. The only other thing I'll add, and I'm remembering this from the previous administration, is that not everything needs to be a piece of legislation. So I do want to give MDE a shout out, as they have been working collaboratively with us on this. And there may not need to be a bill on this front, but either way, we're going to do everything we can to increase transparency. So Matt, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Delegate. Thanks for your leadership, and I echo what you said about MDE and their collaboration on this. We're really excited about getting something done here in this line. But I'll say really quickly, the impetus behind this is really trying to prevent fiscal mishaps, trying to prevent situations where our wastewater treatment plants are in non-compliance or failing, and nobody knows that it's happening until it becomes really expensive. And so currently there's a system where the senators and delegates of a jurisdiction get emails on what wastewater treatment plants are in failure or non-compliance. Well, what we're finding out is that message isn't getting down to those at the level that have to actually manage the fiscal, has the fiscal responsibility of those wastewater treatment plants, like the county and town officials. And so oftentimes those officials don't get notified about these failures until it's really expensive to fix them. And so the whole point of this is to make sure that failing plants are being notified, and that also those jurisdictions that are in charge of them are receiving notifications, so that on the front end, we can try to address them before they become really a big issue. And so really just increasing that transparency of the name of this legislation here with some of the details that you can see here. So we'll stay tuned for a couple weeks or months here to see if this does turn into legislation. But again, thanks, Delegate Baylor, for really championing this with Senator Love and MDE.
Yeah, and thank you, Matt, for everything you do. I think we all share a common goal in ensuring that there is increased transparency across the board for our environmental laws and permits that may be in violation. With that, I'll go forward to the very last but not least piece of legislation. With Delegate Jazz Lewis leaving the General Assembly, he has allowed me to pick up and sponsor the Cherish Act, which I am so incredibly excited to sponsor. And you can go to the next slide. The Cherish Act, as you all know, as it's been a priority for a lot of the amazing organizations on this call for the past recently, poses an opportunity to be the most significant advancement in environmental justice protections that the state has ever seen. I know many of us have a variety of specific examples of communities that have been subjected to the cumulative impacts of differing pollution sources. I have a specific example in my family where my grandma, who lives in southern Anne Arundel County, she's lived in the same mobile home park for 40 years, has been continuously subjected to increasing environmental burdens by different quarries and different things along her neighborhood. And this bill would allow us to make sure that when we are looking at new permits, that we take into account those previous existing environmental burdens that those communities are already facing. So that way we are not allowing our most vulnerable communities that have been left behind for so long to continue to be subjected to increasing environmental harms. Just a few other points, and then I'll kick it over to Ms. Campbell. There's been a lot of work that has gone into this over the interim. I've only been the sponsor for about 2 weeks now, and I have quickly learned that since Sine Die last session, that the advocates and the administration and the Maryland Department of the Environment have been meeting regularly to try and figure out a solution here, so we can actually get this done this session. And I'm just so incredibly honored to be able to help carry this and support you all. So with this, Ms. Campbell, I'll turn it over to you to see if you have anything else to add.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you again for taking over this important bill. I think the main point is this bill did come from EJ communities that have been dealing with these burdens for a long time, including the communities of South Baltimore, which I actually grew up in and graduated from high school, where there are over 70 stationary polluting facilities, and that's only the ones that's being permitted. If you're counting the ones that's not, it goes over 100. And so this bill is really important to really look at, as you already stated, that cumulative impacts that we're not addressing when we're looking at policies and permits in their silos. And so this bill, the main point of this bill is to be able to deny those permits in communities that are already overburdened, especially when they're in the 75 percentile of overburdened communities. And so that's the main point of it, just to deny those permits. And then also, again, focusing on that cumulative impacts. A story I have also to add to that is when I was in high school in Benjamin Franklin, there was a proposal to build a nation's largest incinerator there. It was going to be less than a mile from our school. And we already have the Brusco incinerator, but this one's going to be burning 2 times that amount. And it was going to be added to a community, again, that already has 70 stationary polluting facilities. It just does not make sense. And there is no policies right now currently to protect those communities from being overburdened. And we acknowledge they exist. And now it's time to do the right thing and not just acknowledge them, but protect these communities. And that is essentially what this bill do. It does have a lot of support from EJ communities that have put a lot of work into actually writing this policy and working with MDE and different agencies to make sure that it's implemented in the correct way. And so I'll just add that there. We're super excited about this session and just getting this policy passed and protecting those communities.
Yeah, and just in closing, I think with a piece of legislation this big and this expansive, we really need the help of everybody on this call to contact your elected officials and your members of the General Assembly and tell them that now is the time that we really need to make the most significant advancement in environmental justice that we can. So with that, I think we'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to point out there was a question that came in, really more of a comment that said, "Thank you, Delegate Baylor. The Cherish Act is the most important piece of legislation coming forward," in that person's view. So really does underscore how important this is and how passionate a lot of the community members feel about this. So thank you for all 3 of those bills. We look forward to working with you this coming session. We're going to keep moving fast and furious here. We're a little bit behind schedule, but I'm confident that we'll be able to keep things moving. I'd also want to thank Delegate Hutchinson for coming back for day 2 of the summit. I always appreciate your engagement and thoughtful questions. And looking at the attendees, I also want to point out and thank all the agency representatives that are here. I see a number of folks from Maryland Department of Agriculture, Department of the Environment, and DNR. Thank you for all tuning in. It really shows that this preview is valuable, across the board, across the sectors. So let's jump into our next speaker here, Delegate Ruth. And Delegate Ruth will be talking about the second of 2 PFAS bills that kind of follow the deep dive that Brent gave us and that Senator Love led us into. But real quick, Delegate Ruth has represented District 44B in Western Baltimore County since 2020. She serves on the Labor Elections and Government Committee and sits on its Labor Subcommittee. Her priorities include climate action, transit equity, and racial justice, and she has also fought for laws that would allow the Attorney General to prosecute big oil companies for knowingly contribute to climate change. So, Delegate Ruth, you always bring meaningful legislation forward, and it's always a pleasure to hear from you and your passion on this, on these pieces of legislation. So I'm going to kick it over to you to start with this one.
Great, thank you so much. And can you hear me? Okay, great. And I want to start by giving a shout out to Senator Love for really leading this effort. As she mentioned, we had and has been mentioned several times, we had a number of work groups that met throughout the year, and I was really honored to be able to take part in that. So I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Nicholas first, and she's going to talk a little bit about the problem.
Thank you, Delegate Ruth. And like Senator Love, Delegate Ruth has been working on this very thorny issue of PFAS, toxic forever chemical contamination. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to keep this quick because we talked about PFAS a lot already. In terms of previous legislation on pretreatment, that's really focusing on things like landfill leachate and industrial discharges into wastewater treatment plants. The other big category, kind of what's putting contamination there beyond those industrial discharges, is consumer products. So we heard in those work groups very extensively from wastewater treatment plants that this would be a big help to them, and is also consistent with work that we've already been doing in Maryland for some time. And some companies are taking the lead and actually starting to phase out use, like REI and Patagonia are phasing out the use of some of the PFAS chemicals in their products. So as we talked about, it waterproofing, stain resistance, all of these things are where we're getting them from. And they are highly toxic, so highly toxic in very small amounts that, in fact, the level that was set as sort of a safe level by EPA is below the level at which we can even measure them with modern sampling techniques. So, Delegate Ruth and many colleagues took a big look at what's happening in other places in the country where we can realistically say that we need to phase these out of the consumer products without it functionally changing the product in a negative way. And we're hoping that the wastewater treatment plants who said they really wanted this and would support it will step up and do so. And I'm just going to hand it back to Delegate Ruth, and she can talk a little bit more about the bill itself.
Great, thank you. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you so much, Betsy. Just a really quick, I want to talk a little bit about definitions before I talk about the products, because the definitions are really important. And in this bill, we define PFAS as any product that has one fully fluorinated carbon atom. And what that means is a carbon atom which is surrounded by fluorine atoms, or where all the connections are fluorine atoms, and that carbon, is it fluorine or fluoride? I'm sorry. That carbon fluoride bond is, as has been said, the strongest bond. And so, we're not all of the chemicals that have that bond have been studied extensively, but right now we need to regulate those as a class because there's enough evidence that they all have some health harms that we want to err on the side of caution and make sure that we're phasing them all out. And maybe we'll see what happens in the future, but as these continue to get studied. But the other thing couple of things I wanted to mention is intentionally added, that this bill talks about intentionally added PFAS, where we know these PFAS are added for a specific purpose to make it stain resistant, water resistant, grease resistant. And then there are some, the Department of Environment can, by regulation, designate some products as currently unavoidable use. So that's another thing that's been used in other states. We looked a lot at some of the other states that have worked on PFAS. Maine and Minnesota, I think, were the first two to do extensive product bans. We've also looked at some others. Colorado, California has done some. Of course, their most recent bill was vetoed. We also looked at New Mexico, and we leaned rather heavily on New Mexico because theirs is the most recent and they learned a lot from some of the other states, but we did also look at what some other states have done as well. One of the things that we have two categories. January 1st, 2028, these are the products that we're phasing out. We require manufacturers to stop selling products that contain intentionally added PFAS in these categories as of January 1st, 2028. Cleaning products, cookware, cosmetics, personal care products, which is like shampoos and lotions, dental floss, feminine hygiene products, pet food packaging, juvenile products, and intimacy products, which is things like condoms and lubricants. January 1st, 2029, fabric treatments, ski wax, textiles, clothing, things like that, textile furnishings, upholstered furniture, and paint. One thing that we did not do that some of the other states have done is some of the other states had like a 2032 date, which was everything else. The problem we found is that some of the everything else gets really complicated and you have to dig into some really complicated exceptions and a lot of debate. So we right now just erred on the side of this quite extensive list, and as we go along in the future, we can always come back and look at adding more or adding in everything else. The other thing the bill does is it requires, by January 1st, 2028, it requires manufacturers to disclose and register with MDE any products which do contain intentionally added PFAS. including those that are designated as currently unavoidable uses. They still have to disclose. And there were some questions in the Q&A about does I think insulation was one. Does this contain PFAS? Well, that's why it's very important that we have manufacturers disclose that. And there are abilities of MDE to require testing of products that they think may contain PFAS that were not disclosed, with some penalties for noncompliance. And there is also the creation of a special fund, which ties in also with the biosolids bill. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up, and happy to answer any questions in the Q&A and go to the next bill, which is the climate crimes. And I'm going to turn it over to Brittany Baker to start with.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Delegate Ruth. Glad to be here today. I was on yesterday as well, and many of you know us at Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We're really excited to, again, I mean, we've supported this bill from the beginning, but this year we're really, really being robust about our support because we want to see this get over the finish line. And a big reason that this bill is so important to us is because comprehensive peer-reviewed studies confirm that fossil fuel companies have known since the 1970s about climate change, and they have deliberately misled the public about what they knew about climate change and what they knew about the risk of fossil fuel emissions. And there's evidence present in their internal deliberations, in the scientific research that they sponsored, and then how that contrasts with public rhetoric. And I'll put a news article in the chat that talks about this a little bit more. And so we're really excited to get this over the finish line this year because it's very different from some of the other methods of revenue generation around adaptation. We know that CCAN has been working diligently on the Renew Act, but that's separate. And then we also know that this year there's highly likely going to be a cap and invest bill, but that's totally separate as well. Because when we talk about climate crimes, we're more leaning into that idea of deception, disinformation, misinformation. And so this bill will set up the legal landscape to ensure that at the right time, the right litigation can move forward and hold the largest, most polluting fossil fuel companies accountable for how they've misled the public. So back to you, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you so much. And you know, as Brittany said, this is about companies that lied and misled the public, deceived the public, and committed fraud, and using propaganda, which prevented action in a timely way. If lawmakers and the public had not been deceived by this misinformation, we might have taken action sooner and been able to prevent some of the damage that we're already seeing now. So this bill will authorize the Attorney General to hold the very large fossil fuel companies accountable for their illegal actions. So it's not holding them accountable for climate change, it's holding them accountable for the illegal actions that prevented timely response to climate change. And it doesn't require any lawsuits. All it does is it sets the stage for the Attorney General to make decisions about those lawsuits and to move forward with anything that he deems is a viable lawsuit. It also creates a climate crimes accountability fund for managing any funds that come in from any settlements or judgments, and then those funds can be used for administrative costs of further lawsuits. They can also be used for mitigating the damage caused by climate change from these illegal actions. It also does exempts these suits from something called the Uniform Contribution Among Tortfeasors Act, or just UCATA for short. This is something the Attorney General said that he needs in order to file these suits. The UCATA, and I'm not a lawyer, but it basically has to do with how the liability is allocated between defendants when there are multiple defendants, and allows defendants to sue each other. The Attorney General said that this is a barrier to him being able to settle with any of these companies. And so this bill exempts these suits from the UCATA law. in the same way that we exempted the Key Bridge suits from the Ucata law 2 years ago. That's basically it, and I feel very hopeful that this is going to move forward this year. This is really important so that the taxpayers are not holding the bag, paying the costs for damages caused by these illegal actions. Okay, so the next bill is the Data Center Planning and Transparency Act. I think you heard yesterday about some other data center bills. There's obviously a lot of concerns about data centers, the energy and the environment, and a lot of other things. I'm looking at it from a Planning and Transparency Act. I'm going to turn it over to Dave to set the stage.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Ruth. As you know, and as you talked about yesterday, we talked considerably amount of time on data centers. We are really currently at a rush to approve and build data centers, really through a chaotic and poorly planned process. Counties, municipalities really virtually have no experience planning or even understanding all the implications of approving data centers, especially the new hyperscale data centers, which can use as much electricity and as much water as the city of Baltimore, and may have several hundred diesel generators at one site. We are currently seeing large-scale data center events or activities happening in Frederick, Baltimore, Montgomery, Prince George's, and Howard counties. And we know it's going to be happening all over, just as we see it happening all over in Virginia. So they're not just happening in Data Center Alley, they're happening all over in Virginia. And this is going to happen to Maryland. There really are no geographic boundaries of where data centers can really occur. Guidance and rigor around planning is key to really these local decisions. Also, at a state level, one agency really tracks and publishes information about the locations, energy usage, source of power, greenhouse gas emissions, and number of diesel backup generators. This bill really takes a gigantic step forward in really addressing these issues. Back to you, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you so much, Dave. And I just want to mention, as this says on the slide, data centers have been around for decades, but what we're seeing now is an explosion in the number and size, as Dave has pointed out. I worked in a building with a data center back in the 1980s, but we're not talking about run-of-the-mill data centers now. We're talking about massive data centers. And by way of comparison, one data center that's being planned in my district would require 150 megawatts of energy. And I noticed that the two gas plants that are being proposed to the PSC, one of them will generate 150 megawatts of energy. So we're talking about an entire gas plant that will generate just enough energy for one data center. And so this is a huge problem. I'm looking at it, though, from a planning perspective. And in Maryland, land use and planning is the purview of the counties. So this bill does not try to be too prescriptive in what counties have to do, but it basically says counties have to have a plan. They have to figure out things like siting, where data centers should be allowed to go, where they shouldn't be allowed to go, including perhaps underserved and overburdened communities, agricultural land, undeveloped land, forests. Those are all things that need to be looked at. What type of zoning changes might need to be made? And again, not being prescriptive about what those are, but the counties have to take a look at that. Permitting, community engagement, what community benefits the county might want to require, labor standards for these data centers, and more. So it requires the county or municipality to develop a plan and to publish that plan and to submit that plan to the Maryland Department of Planning. And it does exempt counties which have already developed a plan, because I know some have or are working on it. And then it also says that before any data center moves forward with anything, that they have to submit a disclosure report in advance. And there's they have to submit to the Department of Planning, but there's other agencies, local and state agencies, they have to submit to, and there's a whole list of things that they have to disclose. And it also says that no state funds, that's grants, that's loans, that's tax incentives, can go to any data center until, first of all, the county or municipality has a plan in place and the data center development has filed a disclosure. So the details of this are still being worked out. I've have this out for comment and have gotten a lot of comments back. I have a meeting scheduled with the Department of Planning, but this is the basic form that it's going to take. So that's it, and move on to the next slide, please. So this one I'm going to be pretty quick with. This one, I'm still working out the shape of it. Next slide, please. And so the main problem is residential pesticide application can drift onto neighbors' property, potentially impacting human, pet, pollinator, and environmental health. If somebody wants to treat their own property with pesticides, we don't really stop them from doing that. They have a right to do that. But if my neighbor treats their yard, I should be able to protect my own property from any drift or from, trespass. And I actually have had constituents reach out to me about bad actors who have actually trespassed onto their property and treated areas on their property physically. So we need to make sure that people are protected when their neighbors' yards are treated by commercial applicators. So some of the things that this bill will do is require an expanded notification. Right now, if you are chemically sensitive, you can get a doctor's note and get onto a list to be notified. We're looking to really expand who gets notified when their neighbor is treating for pesticides. Also, making sure that we protect residential pollinator gardens. My entire front yard is a native pollinator garden, and so this is something I worry about a lot. I had a lot of monarch caterpillar deaths this year, and I don't know if it was from pesticide, but I can't help wondering if there was a neighbor who used pesticides that caused that. And then the last thing, and then I'll wrap up because I think I've run over time, is better regulating subscription services. So commercial applicators have subscription services where you can sign up. They come out quarterly and treat. Some of them will only treat by subscription services. They won't come out unless you sign up for the subscription services. And this is a huge problem because you don't even have to be home when they come out. So after the first treatment, they just come out quarterly. They put the pesticides down. They tell you they came out. They send you a bill. They don't even have to touch base with you or talk with you. I think this is a real avenue for overuse of pesticides, unnecessary use. So we're looking at really limiting and regulating that, not stopping the subscription services, but to make sure that they're regulated. And that's it. And I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Delegate Ruth. That's again a great breadth of legislation that you're bringing forward, and a lot of good details there. You do have a number of questions there in the chat about some of the different spraying, some of the legislation. So if you wouldn't mind having some time to head over there, that'd be great. And we're going to keep moving. Following those pieces of exciting legislation, our next presenter is Delegate Terrassa. And Delegate Terrassa is an attorney by trade and has represented Maryland's District 13 since 2019. She serves on the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee and is a member of the Maryland Legislative Transit Caucus. She is a national leader on climate accountability, joining the Leaders for Climate Accountability in 2021 to push for laws that hold corporate polluters responsible. Delegate Terrassa is the longtime lead sponsor of the Beverage Container Recycling, Refund, and Litter Reduction Act, known as the Bottle Bill, which we'll hear about here today, which came within inches of becoming law last year. And so we're excited to see what we're going to do differently this year or how we're going to get across the finish line. So Delegate Terrassa, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So let me, I guess we'd have to go to the next slide. I want to talk about the bottle bill first. So the problem we have, and I think you are all familiar with this, is that 5.5 million beverage containers are sold in Maryland every year, but only a quarter of those are recycled. That leaves more than 4 billion. When I started working on this issue, I thought it was million, but it's really billion. They're left in the environment as litter in landfills or incinerated. So litter pollution harms us all. It harms wildlife. It's a threat to human health. It's wasted energy. It's trashing our neighborhoods. And so we know a good solution to at least for part of this that can go a long way in states that have what's called a bottle deposit bill. That the impact, I'm sorry, the amount of beverage containers that get back into the environment is far less, and they recycle up to somewhere between 70 and 90+% of those beverage containers. So what the bill does, the next slide, I guess, is so what the bill does is it creates this beverage container recycling program and litter reduction program, and it requires a collection a collection of a small deposit, 10 or 15 cents depending on the size, and the deposit is refunded when the containers are returned. They've done this in multiple other states and other countries, and it's worked well. The program is implemented and financed by the beverage producers, with enforcement targets and strong oversight from MDE. So it's budget neutral to the state. And so as it says, I guess the next thing there is that 60 countries and states and territories, including 10 states, have active deposits. And I think I already said that part. So moving to the next one, slide. So we know what the benefits are. The benefits are that, 3.6 billion more containers annually, or of which 2.3 billion are plastic, will be collected. It also reduces litter, you get high quality food grade material for closed loop recycling and reuse, and cost savings for local governments and taxpayers, and creating new jobs in this field. So, there was a lot of momentum last year, as Matt noted. We got it through one of two committees. As you guys, I'm sure, have heard over the last 2 days, there's a lot of change in committees. And so we will see. I'm not sure which committee. I think it should be in E&T. I don't know if it's also going to be in Economic Matters, but, we're looking forward to trying it again this year and very hopeful. So, and also I should mention the EPR bill doesn't preclude that. So I know I have Martha Ainsworth on here. Martha, did you want to add anything? I know you got to speak about this yesterday.
I just like to emphasize how much momentum we had last year, and a couple changes from the year before. We had the support of the Maryland Municipal League. We added an amendment that the stewardship organization of beverage producers would have to reimburse materials recovery facilities, that's MRF, you're recycling, public or private recyclers, that actually collect containers in your curbside bin, and they don't claim their refund. They'd have to reimburse to the MRFs the cost of collecting, transporting, and processing those bottle bill materials that get to them. And another change is that there is a grant fund for reuse programs. It's 10% of unredeemed deposits, and instead of being run by Maryland Department of the Environment, it will be managed by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. So that's one less thing for MDE to worry about, and we've come along to try to get more support from the MRFs.
Right, because just to emphasize that, I think the counties that run their own MRFs are concerned that they will lose money in this process, even though I don't think anybody's claiming it's better for the environment not to do this. I think their concern is they'll lose money for it. So Martha's really done a lot of work on this bill to address those concerns.
I would add that, getting back to the purpose, it's to reduce litter. You can't recycle. This is not a recycling bill.
Right.
But it does involve recycling. You cannot recycle what you can't collect. So the deposit means that we can collect more. But we've also found in the last year, in particular, that we're all made of plastic. That plastic is now gone through the blood-brain barrier and it's accumulating in our brains and our organs. And the more you see, the more you learn about this, the more alarming it becomes. And this is like a first step. Getting those 2.3 billion plastic beverage containers out of the environment is a start to reducing micro and nanoplastics in the environment. It's just a start, but it's something significant that we can do. And that is what motivates this bill. And I think it's a reason why we have so much momentum.
Okay, thank you, Martha. So moving on to the next bill, I have two related bills. This is a ban on chemical recycling, and they're related to each other, I should say. And then I have, if we have a minute, one of the advocates who can speak to why this became so acutely necessary. So basically, this bill makes sure so it clarifies that chemical recycling is not really recycling under Maryland law. It bans new chemical facilities, chemical recycling facilities, and it protects public health and the environment by preventing toxic pollution from plastic to fuel processes. It stops this greenwashing by the plastic industry and promotes real solutions to plastic waste and prioritizes reducing that plastic use and strengthening proven recycling programs. So, do I have another slide on this? I apologize. I don't think. No, that's the only slide we have on that. So, so what I would, let me just get to this next bill really quickly, and then we can go back and I'll have Shamika talk to you a little bit about what's happening in her neck of the woods. Like I said, or previewed, this has become a much more urgent issue given some things that are happening in my district. So the Local Clean Air Act basically affirms a local government's right to pass stronger clean air and water protections in the state or federal minimums. And that's something that's come up with counties believing or concerned maybe that they are preempted, but this affirms their right to pass stronger clean air and waste protections. It clarifies existing laws so communities feel confident adopting strict standards, empowers local action when state and federal protections fall short. And as we know, the federal protections are and continue to be more and more falling short. Protects public health and the environment while maintaining statewide oversight and supports community-driven solutions to the local pollution challenges. So I want to turn it over to Shamika for a few minutes. She has been active in her community, in a community where there's a proposal to do this chemical recycling right next door. So Shamika, do you want to say a few words?
I would love to. Thank you so much, Delegate Terraza, for having me here representing on behalf of the Stop Grace Coalition. For folks who may not know, the Stop Grace Coalition is a grassroots organization that I co-facilitate with Lisa Krause. I see so many of our coalition partners on the phone, so I know that, and I've always known, but I certainly know now that we are in great hands. This is the second session where I'm testifying in support of this legislation. And in the past, this need was theoretical. There were plans from a few chemical companies to run chemical recycling plants in Maryland, and this bill was intended to stave that off. But unfortunately, as we stand today, this is no longer theoretical. There are actual plants that are being piloted in the state of Maryland. And I know because I live 400 feet from one. And my house is not even the closest. There is one that is within 260 feet. And what this facility is planning to do is to process plastics at high temperatures, which will pollute not just our air, but also protected environments that are around it and the Middle Patuxent River, and 560 families that live within half a mile from it. And this is in a place where, I don't know that we've heard a lot, at least I haven't today. It's in Columbia, Maryland. The facility belongs to the W.R. Grace Company, which is headquartered in Columbia, and they have received permission from the county and the state to process 880 pounds of plastic at high heat using a process that is called pyrolysis, or in the case of why we're here today, chemical recycling, but chemical recycling is a way better name because pyrolysis is often considered a form of incineration. I'll let that sit for a minute. But to break down the plastics, the process uses chemical catalysts, which themselves are often toxic at high heat. I think we heard some of that today. The catalysts and the heat turn plastics into char and a very, very toxic oil. There are people on the phone who are way better at giving you the chemical breakdown. I'm a mom. I'm telling you what I know based on what's happening in my community. But if we have questions, I know there are folks on the phone who can answer. But the intention is to use this oil for boat or jet fuel, and the produced oil has been shown to cause cancer in one in 4 cases, and they plan to store it on site in large drums that are prone to leaks. Similar facilities have experienced fires, leaks, and explosions. And there are stats that say that chemical recycling is 100 times more damaging to the environment than virgin plastic production. Again, just going to pause a little bit. All right. So chemical recycling, as you've heard, is a harmful process that requires common sense regulation, which I think this bill is. And it's the type of regulation that we're all familiar with when it comes to chemical processes and combustion. These are not one-to-one examples I'm going to give you, but I think it'll help you highlight some of how we regulate everyday activities that we know to be dangerous combustion when chemicals are involved. So we regulate where people can smoke, and in some places people can no longer smoke inside their own homes because secondhand smoke harms others. This is a chemical combustion process with that we know to be dangerous. At gas stations, we are told not to use lighters or even cell phones because of ignition risks around fuel vapors. And right now we are being warned, we heard it today, to keep plastics out of our dishwashers and away from high heat because heat causes plastics to break down and releases all the harmful chemicals we've already heard into our food, our water, and our air. And we already know that when plastics are exposed to high temperatures, they do not stay stable, they degrade and release toxins. And yet in my community, a chemical company is allowed to expose plastics to extreme heat on purpose. They add chemicals to speed it up, and they burn the resulting gases right next to where families live. The contradiction is why we're here today. It's why my community and future communities need you, and it's why this bill is necessary. I'm here to answer any questions, but I'll turn it back over to Jen Terraza. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I really appreciate it. And Matt, I see you come back on. I don't know if we're out of time. If we are, that's fine. But I really appreciate you guys giving us the time to discuss these bills today. I really could use all the support we can get. But thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here and bringing this legislation. Without you, none of this summit happened. So we really appreciate this. And I will say you've drummed up a lot of questions in the Q&A on the number of
yes.
you do have here. So whether the advocates or delegate, if you want to hop in there and help answer those, that'll be great.
Sure. Yeah.
You really are attacking this at many levels, which I think is important, from the bottle bill to the chemical recycling. All of this gets at how we're going to reduce the plastic pollution in our environment. And so I really thank you for all that. We're going to move forward with our break coming up here because I'm sure people are anxious to get up and move around. I know I am a little bit. Before we do so, I want to put a word out to the advocates here on the call. Go ahead and use the chat to get some information out to the attendees. If you have bill numbers that for the legislation that was presented, put those in the chat. If you have emails or websites where people can go to learn more or to get in touch with somebody if they want to get involved, put all that information in the chat. And we'll hang out here for just about 5 minutes as we take a quick break. And then we'll come back and we'll finish up with about 4 more legislator presentations, and then we'll move into our agency presentations. So stick with us, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for the time. I know I certainly appreciated it and the good music to go along with it. We've got one more poll in the chat, or one more poll launched right now. I'll say we've got to increase our 18 to 24 age representation here on the summit. But thank you all for participating in the polls. Thank you to all the advocates for putting information in the chat and sharing that. I'm excited to roll into our second half of the program here, where I'll be introducing, first to kick us off is Delegate Dana Stein. I know I've had the pleasure to work with Delegate Stein on a number of bills, and I'm sure many of you have as well, which just shows the breadth of legislation that he works on and the importance of all of it. And so, just as an intro, Delegate Stein represents District 11B in Baltimore County and is a leading voice on environmental issues as a longtime member and former vice chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee. With a perfect Maryland League of Conservation voters score and recognition as a green champion, he has spearheaded impactful legislation on emission reductions, clean water initiatives, wastewater resilience, and continuing to advocate for the protection of the Chesapeake Bay and a sustainable future for all of Marylanders. Delegate Stein, thanks for being here today, and I'm excited to hear what you're talking about.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you for that kind introduction. I appreciate it. It's nice to be with everyone on the summit this afternoon, and I'm going to talk about two bills. Or actually, I'm going to do sort of the lead in the intro, and then in each case, turn things over to the wonderful advocates who are leading the charge on these bills. So the first one is electronics recycling, and this is a variation of a bill that I've introduced the past couple of years. It reflects the fact that our current electronics recycling program really doesn't do much in terms of diverting the electronics waste stream. So it modernizes the program in a number of respects. And a key change from last year is that this is a producer-funded program, whereas before there was a consumer fee that would be attached to the items that are to be recycled. But this changes that. And with that, I want to turn things over to Kitty McElroy, who's the president of the Maryland Recycling Network, who will go into more detail.
Hi, I'm just waiting for my video to pull up. I don't know if you all can see me or hear me. Can you confirm it? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Delegate Stein and MLC. Once again, my name is Kitty McElroy. I'm here on behalf of Maryland Recycling Network and the current president. Okay, so this bill is needed because most local governments are landfilling electronics due to recycling costs. MDE program data shows that there are likely millions of pounds of electronics being landfilled in Maryland each year. And we only have about 13 years left of landfill capacity in the state when factoring in population growth. Additionally, battery fires are increasing in the waste management sector. The program will divert battery devices to proper outlets, reducing incidents. And additionally, it will increase our domestic supply of critical minerals and precious metals, which are in high demand by the clean energy, electronics, auto, and jewelry industries. So the expanded list of devices that would be covered under this program include household electronics like computers, monitors, other computer equipment, televisions, laptops, tablets, routers, printers, cameras, radios, remotes, headphones, DVD players, video game consoles, cable boxes, home audio equipment, etc. Similar to the paint and packaging and paper EPR laws recently enacted in Maryland, electronic manufacturers will be required to register with and pay into producer responsibility organizations, known as PROs. So these PROs will operate and coordinate with each other under one coordinating body, which will be responsible for submitting annual registrations and fees to MDE. The coordinating body will also contract with and fund electronic recyclers, which can be utilized by local governments, retailers, and other end-of-life electronic collectors. The program will increase human and environmental health and safety, especially for waste workers and first responders, by funding a statewide campaign to educate the public about recycling outlets for electronics and battery devices, as well as on the dangers of lithium-ion battery fires. The campaign will promote free public collection sites for material drop-off, to keep these materials out of curbside waste and recycling collection trucks, since battery devices are causing fires on trucks and at waste and recycling facilities. Under this program, manufacturers must provide educational materials with a new electronic device offered for sale in the state. This includes providing printed materials in or part of the packaging and or on the receipt with a website, phone number, and or QR code. So manufacturers must also fund public awareness campaigns to advertise and promote this on a regular basis, including ads on the internet, television, radio, billboard, public transit, solid waste collection truck wraps or decals, and home mailers. The program will establish a permanent multi-stakeholder advisory council to review and recommend changes to the program over time, which MDE can update in regulation. Some examples of what the advisory council will make recommendations on include an expansion of the types of electronics covered under the program, increasing free public access to include additional drop-off sites, mail-back programs, or at-home curbside pickup service, funding battery fire detection and suppression equipment to safeguard collection sites, waste facilities, and vehicle operations, requirements on the reuse, refurbishment, and recyclability of electronics, including the potential for eco-modulation and accessibility for repair redesign. This could also include post-consumer content and greenhouse gas reduction manufacturing goals when considering product design. And lastly, the need for a disposal or landfill ban on electronics. So overall, this program will support green-collar jobs, including local businesses such as certified recyclers in Maryland. And lastly, the bill mirrors recent legislative updates in Oregon, Illinois, South Carolina, and one underway in Minnesota. That's all I have right now. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kitty. And thanks, Matt, for the opportunity to present on this. And we certainly welcome additional support. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And then, Matt, if it's okay, I'll go on to my second bill, which deals with the SEEF, the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. And specifically, it would establish that there are mandated appropriations for climate change related programs under the SEEF. It would say for the next 4 years, there has to be a minimum $365 million from the SEEF that are appropriate to different categories of programs that impact climate change. And with that, you all know Kristen Harbison, the wonderful political director of Maryland LCV. So I will turn things over to her and she will elaborate on this.
Thanks so much, Delegate. And everybody, I'm delighted to be here with my good friend, Delegate Stein, to work on this bill. So just a background for anybody who might not understand what the SEEF is. It is a specific designated special fund. It's the single largest non-taxpayer generated source of revenue that's specifically designated to support low-income families and overburdened and underserved communities in Maryland to advance the goal of climate pollution reduction. And I think the fact that it is not taxpayer generated, this does not come out of the general fund, is really important in this tough fiscal year. And as the delegate was saying, so just as some context, last year the General Assembly used a significant amount of money from this fund to help balance the state budget, which was understandable. We were in a budget crisis. We all understand that. And this is a large pot of money coming from these non-taxpayer generated sources that could be used. What we want to make sure of is that at least the programs that are specifically designated for climate programs are funded at an adequate level. And so what we did was we started with the money that was spent out this year in the last recorded fiscal year for the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, and said that's the baseline. We need to make sure that at least that money is being spent for these programs. There are other uses that could be used for this program, that this money could be used for to support other climate and environmental programs that we care about. But this is just to make sure that the baseline. And so it uses a baseline, as the delegate said, and continues from fiscal year 2028 to 2032. We also added on this, there are a couple other programs that were not necessarily included this year that we want to make sure are funded. One of them is electric school buses, which would be a fund that would come out of the CEF, but would be spent by the Maryland Department of the Environment. And that makes sure that helps to cover the difference between diesel school buses and electric school buses, which is a really important way to make sure that we keep our children healthy. The other additional money would be for what's called the Maryland Clean Energy Center, which is a green bank. And that's a really smart way to spend this money because it helps to support innovation and technological advances. And because it's a green bank, that money gets recycled year over year. So it amplifies and creates and helps to grow the investment in the state in the clean energy economy. So it's a pretty simple bill, but obviously we are very interested in any support that people can give us. This is part of a larger program that the environmental community writ large is working to step in to make sure that all of the Maryland environmental programs are supported and funded adequately. So this is part of a larger effort that would also support not just the CEF, but also the environmental agencies and the environmental programs that those support. So that's what we got for you, but happy to answer any questions. And we really are interested in your support. If anybody wants to help out, they can reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. And so Matt, that's that's a wrap on my presentations. And if anyone, I guess, just like for the first bill, if anyone has any questions, to put them in the chat or to reach out to me or Kristen directly.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make the note. Both Delegate Stein and Kristen's email address is on the screen here. I have one question, Delegate. I'm not sure, but I'm sorry. I personally don't know, but how long has CEF been around? And I understand last year it faced pretty dramatic cuts. And so I'm curious, do you feel that using last year as a baseline is sufficient, or will you see the need to grow from that in the future years?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, there were significant cuts last year. I think the number that we're putting to this bill we view as sort of the baseline, and conceivably could be higher. I will also in a second ask Kristen to weigh in as to how long the CEF has been around. I believe about 20 years. From the decade of the aughts. I think that's right. And Kristen, maybe if you could confirm that as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yes, so the CEF was established by the General Assembly in 2008, and it's managed by the Maryland Energy Administration. One of the things I think it's important to know is that although the CEF, there are two major programs that fund the CEF. And we can go into and where that money comes from gets really weedy really fast. But one of them comes from the Renewable Portfolio Standard that we set that sets baselines for how much renewable energy the Maryland that Maryland utilities need to buy from renewable sources. They're not able to, when they aren't able to reach those goals, they pay what's called an alternative compliance payment into the CEF. Because of a lot of different issues, because of the pandemic, because of problems getting solar developed, all these things, that money has raised. It used to be that money was in the tens of thousands of dollars coming into the CEF every year, and now it's more like the hundreds of millions. So the amount of money that is available has ballooned in the last several years, and so that's one of the reasons that we're paying attention. It's why there's so much money. That is so attractive for the General Assembly looking to balance the budget because there's so much money available. There is obviously also a huge risk. There's a huge need for these programs. The climate pollution reduction plan is estimates that to meet our climate goals, it would cost $1 billion a year. So yes, there is needs for this money. Yes, we should be spending all this money to reach our climate goals. But that's sort of where that's some of the really important background. And again, it can get really weedy really fast, but I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Yeah, well, I'll just point out there's a weedy question in the Q&A for you to answer. But your point is so important, and I'll say the cost of not acting, as we learned yesterday from Ian with Maryland Energy Administration, is even more expensive. And so, let's take this opportunity to really put the money that we have to work and to really make a difference with that. And so, Delegate, thank you. Kristen, thank you. I really appreciate both of the insight that both of you provided, and I look forward to working on this and seeing how this legislation moves in this coming session.
Thank you.
So moving on to our next presenter here, Delegate Lehman. Delegate Lehman has represented District 21 since 2019. She serves on the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee and chairs its Local Government Bi-County Agencies Subcommittee and sits on the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee. Delegate Lehman is a fierce advocate for renewable energy, electric vehicle incentives, eliminating single-use plastics, and a bill that I've worked on with Delegate Lehman in the past, and one that I think we're going to hear a little bit about today, is protecting Marylanders from flooding, protecting our waterways, our wetlands, our communities from the impact of flooding. And so, Delegate Lehman, it's a pleasure to introduce you today, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off on, I believe, what is 3 bills that you'll be talking about? Maybe 4. So we'll buckle up, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Can you hear and see me okay?
I sure can, yeah.
Okay, great. Good. I'm doing this from my car. I just left a protest on Georgia Avenue in Silver Spring and didn't have time to make it home, so I'm winging it here from my car. But want to thank my wonderful Chief of Staff, Mary Jane, for making up these great slides. So we did substitute at the last minute one bill for another one. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is the Patuxent Research Center bill that I want to give credit where it's due. Senator Rosa Pepp approached me about cross-filing this, and the idea came up because years and years and years ago, we're talking decades ago, Senator Rosa Pepp, who was then a state delegate along with the District 21 team back then, put in a bill to protect the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which is also in our district. It's about 6,500, 7,000 acres of, of farmland in northern Prince George's County. And President Reagan, in a very high-profile way, maybe others beside him, but he made a big splash and a big to-do about the fact that that Beltsville Agricultural Research Center being in suburban Washington didn't make sense. This was the kind of research and the work that should have been done in other parts of the country, in the heartland and elsewhere. And he proposed closing it and selling it off. And so I think that's what prompted the legislation way back when to protect bark. And Senator Rosa Pepp got to talking to a former colleague, Delegate Tim Maloney, and said, do you think we should try to do something similar to protect the Patuxent Research Center? And on the site of the Patuxent Research Center is also the Patuxent Wildlife Refuge. It's 13,000 acres in Prince George's County. And again, I have to say, and this actually straddles the line between state districts 23 and 21, massive area of undeveloped property, mostly wooded, but also wetlands, meadows, ponds. And there are a few buildings where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a visitor center, and of course it does research. And given the Trump administration's, let's face it, I would call it disdain for a lot of federal agencies and the importance of scientific research, and they've already made noise about closing BARC again. And so we're putting in this bill to protect the Patuxent Research Center, and the way we would do that is through zoning. So it's pretty straightforward. It says that the Prince George's County Council, when it sits as the district council, it's the same group of lawmakers, owns only when they decide land use cases, they're called the district council. And it would say they cannot do any kind of enron. First of all, it says that the property would be zoned, agricultural, but it also could be zoned. We could debate that and get feedback like forest or open space, because it's really not agricultural per se, but it's borrowing that language from all those years ago when of the General Assembly protected bark. So it says if the federal government, tries to sell or lease that land, that the zoning has to remain. And then it ties the hands of the district council, the county council sitting as the district council, saying it cannot try any end run around the zoning with like text amendments and that kind of thing. And not that we believe the current council would do that, but you just don't know what the future holds. So I think that's pretty powerful. The General Assembly was successful in doing that all those years ago with bark. I don't see any reason why we will not succeed with this bill to protect the Patuxent Research Center. And that bill it is in drafting. It's not a pre-file, but it's in drafting, and it will go to the Environment and Transportation Committee. So I want to stop and see if anybody has questions about it.
No questions have come through just yet, but we can move to your next bill and see if any do.
Absolutely. Okay, so next is flood risk disclosure. And I want to caution, so this first slide is accurate. Well, okay, it says, okay, so it looks like that. I'm confused because I saw the early slides that got submitted, and I know that they all said environment and transportation, and I wasn't sure if that was a reference to my committee, now my previous committee, or the committee where we thought these bills were going. And it's getting a little confusing. I think a lot of you know, because this seventh standing committee has been added, but not only that, but a lot of the jurisdictional issues have moved in between committees. So where a year ago, well, the 2025 session, I should say, this flood risk disclosure bill would have come to the Environment and Transportation Committee. Well, because housing is now in economic matters, this bill will go to economic matters. We suspected that. It is a pre-file. I've already looked at it. It is indeed going to ECM. And so what it will do, the second slide is a little confusing because it inadvertently mixes this flood risk disclosure bill with a bill that comes after it, which is StreamSmart. But essentially, this flood risk disclosure bill requires sellers of real property to fill out a worksheet that details whether the property they are selling has ever flooded in the past, whether it is in a floodplain, and what its risk of is for flooding in the future. I happened to be at a conference in Pennsylvania, and I picked up a brochure, and it was talking about a Pennsylvania flood risk disclosure law that was under consideration in the Pennsylvania legislature. And it got me wondering, I wonder if Maryland has this law. I would think we do, because this brochure said that 30 states have this law already. And I was thinking, surely Maryland has this law. Well, guess what? We don't. And then I reached out to the realtors, and they said, we actually have been wanting this for a long time because it protects sellers and buyers. And with increased flooding, with increase in catastrophic storms and the frequency and the intensity, and in flooding, think Ellicott City, those 800-year floods in a 3-year period. People need to know this. If they are going to look at buying property, they need to know clearly what the flood risk is, whether the property has flooded ever in the past, and what the potential is for flooding in the future. So again, this bill is fairly straightforward. 30 states have it. I never take anything for granted, but we're going to work it hard. But it helps to have the realtors on board, and I feel good about it. It will be in economic matters. So any questions about that?
We don't have any coming in through right now. We do have one about the Patuxent, which why don't we go through and get through your other two bills, and then we'll jump back
Sure.
to all this.
Yeah. Okay, so on my next bill, I do have help. I hope Denise Kainer is here. And Denise, if you are here, I'm going to give a very brief intro of what gave sort of rise to this. Matt referenced this in passing when he introduced me. I work with Matt and some other river keepers several years ago on a bill that took the concept of an existing law, which is called CoSmart, and requires siting and design criteria for just government buildings and infrastructure that are built in areas at risk of coastal flooding. And the idea of these river keepers, and I still think it's a great idea, is that this should extend to private development, because that law currently only applies to state investments in buildings or in roadways and other infrastructure. And so we tried that bill. It never got out of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I tried it twice, including one time cross-filing it with then Senator Sarah Elfreth, and she didn't get any traction in the Senate either. So, it's been a couple of years since we've revisited this issue. And, again, with all of the challenges with catastrophic storms and flooding, I had started talking to DNR and MDE about the concept of expanding this law to properties at risk of riverine flooding, because that's a significant challenge in Maryland. Again, when you think of, the Ellicott City flood, that was riverine flooding. And I have the Patuxent River that passes right through the heart of my district in Laurel. And so that's a real concern. So Denise worked with me to come up with language. And Denise, if you could summarize what the bill does.
Yeah, so essentially as Delegate Lehman indicated, what the bill does is put in sort of motion the same kinds of protections that exist under the CoSmart program for state-funded infrastructure projects, buildings or roads or whatever, that are located in riverine areas. So to me, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It says, gee, those areas also are prone to inundation associated with high rainfall events and historically high rainfall events that are, again, associated with climate change. So what the bill essentially requires is that for state-funded projects, they would have to be developed by the CoSmart Council, siting and design criteria, just like they did for the coastal areas, but for riverine areas. And so we would begin the process in the state of making sure that riverine areas, if there were any state or local government projects that relied upon state funds, that there would be protections to ensure that those projects wouldn't be inundated by, and the legislation includes by a 500-year flood event. So that's essentially what it does, and it has timelines. So there's a little bit of phase in period for this to be effective, because the CoSmart Council will have to develop the siting and design criteria for these riverine areas. But the legislation does say that it should be tied to preventing inundation associated with a 500-year flood event.
And Denise, did you want to describe briefly, unless you are not clear on the concerns from DNR and MDE? They are not opposed to this at all. They tell us that they have been thinking about an expansion to riverine flooding, but they raise some sort of technical questions about maps and the status of maps and when they might be updated.
Right. So the way the legislation is crafted, it basically puts on the CoSmart Council the obligation to describe the data, the models, and the methods and maps that need to be used. And that's why there needs to be a little bit of time, to make sure that whatever needs to be done by the CoSmart Council to put those tools in place, can be done and can be implemented. I mean, when we talk with the Maryland Department of the Environment in particular, the fellow that was the head of this program for a long time in the sort of the National Floodplain Management Program, essentially said that the CoSmart Council has talked among itself for years now about expanding into riverine areas. And I think that this legislation will effectively give the mandate that they have to stop just talking about it. And they need to actually move forward and put these siting and design criteria in place.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so, they're going to be supportive, but I think we're going to have to compromise on the timeline based on their concerns about updated mapping.
Right.
And as Denise said, the the Coastmark Council having up-to-date information and tools that it needs to design a unique checklist of siting and design criteria that is going to be probably not dramatically different, but somewhat different than a coastal checklist would be.
Right. I'd like to mention too that Maryland wouldn't be the first state that has begun to go in this direction. Vermont, New Jersey, and of course North Carolina with that terrible riverine flooding that happened in 2024 that killed 100 people and destroyed communities. They're all moving in that same direction to put these standards in place, not just in coastal areas, but in riverine areas as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for your help with this, Denise. Any questions, Matt?
No, we don't have any questions, so we're going to keep rolling through your next one, which I'm excited to hear about, the ban on exotic pet ownership by private citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little bit different for me, but I had approached the Humane Society years ago about this idea of banning the ownership of exotic pets. And the reason was, I don't know if any of you on this, in this summit remember, but a few years back, somebody in southern Prince George's County who owns several zebras had them escape from his property, and they were on the run for several days. And I think there were at least two, but there might have been three of them. And, you wouldn't think a zebra could be, missing for long because obviously they kind of stand out with their stripes, but they were, on the lam for a few days. And sadly, it had a tragic ending because either two of them died or all of them died because they never were captured and they didn't make it back safely. At least one or two of them, got caught up on fences, and it was just horrifying. But the first thing I said when I read this news story, which is I imagine what a lot of people said, is why does a private citizen even own zebras? Like, why? What rationale is there for it? Why is it even allowed? Well, it's allowed because it's not allowed. Our state, law does not prohibit it. It does prohibit ownership of certain other kinds of exotic pets. But when I first approached the Humane Society, they said, yeah, we've looked at that. The timing is not quite right. We have other priorities. We have to, we want to be strategic about it, but we agree with you. And so, from the time I initially approached them, I asked maybe one or two more times and the timing wasn't right. Well, I guess Humane Society now goes by Humane World, and there is new leadership there. So I thought, you know what, maybe it's time to take this issue up again and just pitch it. And Stacy Volodin, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. She's wonderful. I've met with her a few times. And as soon as I approached her, she said, we would love to partner with you on this. So this bill will actually go to the House Judiciary Committee. And why is that? It's because once we pass this ban, and I do not know if it'll pass the first year. I hope it will. I hope we'll make a good argument for it about safety issues and the appropriateness of people, owning wild animals, human safety, animal safety, escapes, all of those things. And we'll put up our best arguments and hope we get the job done. But it will go to judiciary because if you violate this once it takes effect, and it will also have to have, it will have to grandfather people that do own these animals. And it, of course, will allow for the continued ownership by conservation organizations and zoos and that kind of thing. But it will be a criminal penalty if you are found to own one of these animals. And because of the criminal penalty, it cannot be considered by the Environment and Transportation Committee. Yes, it's animal welfare, but the penalties are serious. And so because they're criminal, the Judiciary Committee has to be the committee of jurisdiction. But quickly, it does prohibit the private ownership of zebras, of kangaroos, of wallabies, and an animal I had never heard of, but they're called wallaroos, and they are a hybrid, and they're a cross between, I guess, wallabies and kangaroos, but they're a lot smaller. But to emphasize again, these are all wild animals. They should not be pets, and they can be dangerous. I mean, I'm sure you all have read and heard about how powerful, kangaroos are. Their legs are extremely powerful. They can kick, they can stomp people to death. You see people make light of it. They punch almost like boxers. And someone told me a story of some guy in like Tennessee who owned a kangaroo and got really intoxicated and thought it was funny to get into a boxing match. Well, the kangaroo like pummeled this man. He didn't die, but he ended up very seriously injured. And so I would love your support on this. Again, it's a little bit unusual, but Maryland does have a long list of exotic animals that cannot be owned as pets. And so I'm grateful for interest and support on this bill.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that. What a range of legislation this year, Delegate. I really appreciate, as always, your ambition and desire to bring meaningful legislation from zebras to flooding. I see it in the future, a Riverine Smart committee or guidelines and principles because of your hard work. And so I just want to say on behalf of all the organizers today, thank you for presenting today and for bringing all this legislation forward in this General Assembly's legislative session coming up. There's a few questions in the chat, and I know you're on the phone in your car, so it's probably hard for you to answer. But if any of your advocates who are on want to jump over into the Q&A and answer,
or if you want to read them to me, Matt, that would be helpful.
Well, we're a little bit behind schedule, Delegate.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to try to keep moving.
Can I follow up then, either through the chat? Because I want you to be able to move along. Can I follow up and individually, or put my cell number and email in there for people to reach out directly?
Yeah, that would be huge. And so there's an invite from Delegate Lehman to reach out. Her email address is on the screen here. So if people want to make sure to copy that, mary.lehman@house.maryland.gov. Send her an email and she'll be sure to get back to you. And to answer one question in the chat from somebody generally, yes, this is being recorded, and everybody who signed up to attend the program this weekend will receive a copy of the recording in your email. It'll also be publicly available through the Maryland Legislative Coalition's website. So just to point that out. So thank you, Delegate. We're going to get moving on to our next
Thanks
speaker
so much.
here. And I really appreciate it. And so next up, we have Delegate Foley, who has represented District 15 since 2021. She serves on the House Environment and Transportation Committee and chairs its Non-Energy Utilities Subcommittee. With a background in journalism and labor organizing, Delegate Foley has championed environmental protections, including banning gas-powered leaf blowers, wildlife protection and highway crossings, and a minimum recycled content standard for products. Today, Delegate Foley is going to be talking to us about two bills here that's focused on plants and air quality. And so, Delegate, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year, everybody. I'll just get right into it. I have become, since joining the Environment and Transportation Committee, which I continue to serve on, I have become a little bit of an expert on invasive plant species. And a few years ago, I had legislation to allow local jurisdictions to manage invasive running bamboo, which can be totally out of control. And that got me looking more at invasive species in general. And 2 years ago, we passed a comprehensive reform to Maryland's invasive plant species law. That law, which is about to go into a full effect here, the regulations are being promulgated as we speak. It has to do with the sale of invasive species. So what we have to do is enable, if we want to manage invasive species, we have to enable the counties themselves to regulate them. And that's what this bill does with respect specifically to Tree of Heaven, which I'll get to in a second, but also we decided we're going to amend this legislation to add an amendment to make it apply to all the trees on the Maryland prohibited invasive plant list, which is being developed, as I said, as we speak, in this new invasive species legislation. So what this will do, it'll enable local jurisdictions like counties to create a bounty or native tree replacement program to incentivize the removal and eradication of tree of heaven and other invasive trees. Other legislation like this has been passed in other states, and it is becoming more and more a popular way to regulate and manage invasive plant species across the country. Judy Fulton is an expert in this area, and she is the main advocate on this bill. This bill obviously will go to the Environment and Transportation Committee. It has been given a number. The number is HB 35, and I believe we will have a Senate cross-file, although the senator did not pre-file the bill, but will likely cross-file the bill in the regular session and sponsor it there. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy to explain why this is important.
Thank you very much. Let me start with defining what an invasive plant is. I want to make it clear that although all invasives are non-native, most non-natives are not categorized as invasive. So this will only cover the species that cause harm to the environment, to human health, or cost a lot of money. So that would be both public funds, but also private funds. That's why this is an enabling bill, because you and your neighbors might find that someone on the block has an invasive plant, an invasive tree in this particular situation, and it's causing you to spend a lot of time trying to keep it off your property. So that's why the counties and municipalities can pass ordinances to further restrict these plants. There's the selling, there's the planting. So going forward, once an ordinance is passed, those may be prohibited. But also, this restricts their growing on another person's property. And I'm sure you've seen, for instance, bamboo, the law that was passed 3 years ago, spreading from one person's property to another. In the same way, the other invasive trees that are included here are covered by this. And tree of heaven, you might be aware of, not only is a problem causing harm itself to the environment and people's properties, but it's also the host plant for the spotted lanternfly, which can damage plants, especially they're very scary for vineyards because they can destroy vineyards. Personally, there are other grapes and other related plants on people's private property that can also be affected. The bounty programs is a big deal because that really provides a big incentive that has been shown to work, as Delegate Foley said, in other states. There's another important piece to this bill, in that the University of Maryland Extension is really supporting the idea here of limiting invasive plants. They already have web pages that include information on some invasive plants, but with this bill, they plan to really increase the number of species that are covered and focus a lot on how you can tell the difference between, say, a native plant or a desirable landscape plant that's not native and these invasive plants. And also, there are very specific ways to control and eradicate the plants, and the University of Maryland will be helping with that.
Okay, we'd be happy to take any questions. Or you want me to keep going?
Let's go ahead and keep going.
Okay, all
we
right.
have questions that rolled in right now, so we'll keep moving.
Okay, great. Okay, the next one that I'm sponsoring is Clean Air Quiet Communities Act. This is the latest installment in my crusade to get rid of gasoline-powered leaf blowers, something I have unsuccessfully fought for at the state level since I joined the General Assembly 5 years ago. This is my latest iteration of this. I keep trying to make it simpler and simpler on a state level. So what this bill does, let me just say, first off, a number of jurisdictions in Maryland, large jurisdictions, including Montgomery County, where I live, do have bans on gasoline-powered leaf blowers. So does Baltimore City. So does Annapolis. There's an executive order in Anne Arundel County. So, and then there are a number of smaller jurisdictions that also have bans on gasoline-powered leaf blowers. And I will add that the District of Columbia has a ban on gasoline-powered leaf blowers. There has been a little bit of difficulty sometimes enforcing those, but they're working through them. But I just point that out. So there are many jurisdictions where you cannot use gasoline-powered leaf blowers. However, at the state level, as I said, I've tried many iterations of this bill, and this is this year. It's about as simple as it can be, which is that we are prohibiting state agencies after July 1 of 2026 from purchasing gasoline-powered leaf blowers. No state agency can purchase them. And then beginning January 1, 2031, 5 years later, which is give or take the lifespan of a gasoline-powered leaf blower, that no state or contractor will, or subcontractor will be employed by the state, will be able to use gas-powered leaf blowers on state land, state-owned land. That is the bill. And I'm hopeful that this year, as a stripped-down version, that we can get the bill passed. I've tried this many, many years in a row and have not gotten traction with this bill or with this issue. I'm hoping that this being simple enough, we'll be able to get there. Marie Laporte is the advocate on this bill, and she is an expert on why we need to reduce the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers.
Thank you, Delegate Foley, for your persistence on this bill. I don't think you could possibly overstate the harm of the air pollution and noise pollution that these devices have on workers and anybody nearby. The pollution is really quite stunning. Just using a gas leaf blower for an hour is equivalent to driving a car from Baltimore to Miami, as far as air pollution. Importantly, a gas leaf blower will put out 23 times the carbon monoxide as a pickup truck. So just imagine you are a worker and you've got a backpack leaf blower on your back, just inches from your face, and that is what you're breathing, the equivalent of 23 pickup truck tailpipes. So it's incredibly harmful. People who do landscaping work frequently complain about headaches, nausea. They have dizziness, tinnitus from the hearing damage. It causes asthma attacks. It can cause cancer, strokes, heart attacks. And recently I've been reading multiple studies on PM 2.5. It's a tiny particle air pollution that comes out of these devices in tremendous quantities that is linked to lower immunity. Actually, the World Health Organization considers PM 2.5 to be the deadliest of all air pollutants. It's also linked in multiple studies to reductions in male fertility. So these workers are losing their hearing, they are losing their health, they are losing their ability to have children. For what? We have electric devices that are just as good. Consumer Reports and other independent researchers say the electric devices are just as powerful. They do a great job. And importantly, we need to mention that while electric devices, if you're a landscaper and you need to use them all day, you might need several batteries, and those batteries are more expensive, but you save, for many landscapers, well over $1,000 a year in fuel costs. And so most analyses that we have seen have all shown savings. Usually by year 2, it's actually cheaper to buy a more expensive electric leaf blower and charge it with electricity than it is to buy an inexpensive gas one and to spend all that money in gas. So I hope that Delegate Foley can get it passed, and we're right behind her, pushing along the way. And if you'd like to help join us, just reach out and contact me.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. And I just, if I didn't mention, this is likely going, well, this has been assigned to the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee for hearing. And yeah, I think that about covers it. We'll be happy to answer any questions, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We actually do have
yeah, oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for bringing these forward. And we do have a number of questions in the chat. If you guys don't mind pointing your attention to the Q&A feature there, and we'll help to get those answered. And we're going to keep rolling into our last legislator presentation of the program. And with me, and who I have the pleasure of introducing, is Delegate Guyton. And Delegate Guyton has represented District 42B since 2019 and is the newly appointed Vice Chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee. Congratulations, Delegate. She has sponsored or co-sponsored legislation to protect agriculture and conservation easements from eminent domain, upgrade septic systems through the Bay Restoration Fund, and PFAS use in pesticides, and ban gasoline-powered leaf blowers, which we just heard, among many other initiatives to protect Marylanders and the environment. And so, Delegate Guyton, thank you for joining us today, and thanks for sponsoring this important legislation that we're going to hear about.
Thank you so much, Matt. And it is wonderful to see everyone on here today, and especially to follow 3 of my favorite colleagues, Delegate Foley, Delegate Lehman, and Delegate Stein, all former and or current colleagues on the ENT committee. And now we also have energy. So it's a busy year for us. Thank you for shining light on all of this legislation, and of course on this bill as well. This bill was sponsored last year as House Bill 747, but we do have a number for this year. It just popped up. We are House Bill 146, and that has been pre-filed, so it is in. I also have a cross-file this year, Senator Ben Brooks. And if you remember, this bill actually did pass the House committee and the House floor. It passed the Senate committee, which is usually the hard part, and was stalled in the last 10 minutes of session on sine die. So we are hopeful. And of course, I also don't take anything for granted, as one of my colleagues just said, but we're hopeful we can get this one out early as a pre-file and move it forward so that it can't be held or be well, there can't be any shenanigans in the last few minutes like there were last year. So the idea of this bill is that it addresses the environmental contamination that's associated with neglected wastewater systems or septics, right? So this legislation is important for a lot of reasons. It came about with the help of a whole lot of people, and we call ourselves Team Septic. So I'm happy to be a member of Team Septic officially. I know we have Ellie Bassett here from Clean Water Action, and they were lead advocates on this bill. And I agree with you, Marie, nobody should risk their health to move leaves. So I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chats. I'll try not to do that. It was referred to Team Septic last year by one of the testimonies as being an unholy alliance of environmentalists and industry representatives who are working to solve the same problems. And we don't see that a lot in legislation and in the General Assembly. So it's pretty exciting. The legislation requires that septic systems must be inspected and pumped out at the time of property transfer if these services haven't been performed and certified within the last 3 years. So this 3-year timeline was suggested by the Maryland On-Site Wastewater Association, again, the industry. Association. And the reason behind this bill is that there is clear evidence that failing septic systems contribute to water contamination and particularly high E. coli levels that can make human beings sick, right? But currently, we really don't know how much these are contributing to the problem because we don't require inspections at all. So this bill formalizes the best practices in the industry and it protects homeowners and also renters, but mostly our environment and our water quality. So the reason that I sponsored this bill and was so excited about it is that I do spend a lot of time up here in my district on the Gunpowder River. And we always have excessive E. coli levels, particularly in the summer. Delegate Stein and I spoke with both state and county representatives a few years ago, heard a lot of different reasons why this might be happening, but it was actually the river keepers who finally said very directly, look, one of the biggest contributors to this has to be all of these aging septic systems from these very old and often beautiful historic homes that are right along the Gunpowder River. And so that's how this bill was born. Let's see. We did put a few changes into the bill last year that weren't original to the first draft, and that is that we did exempt some family transfers. We also decided to put some compliance enforcement into the bill, which I believe is really, really important. So after you have this, you certify that it's a completion of inspection, but you also have to certify a completion of repair if you have and have to report a failing septic system. So there's a little bit of pushback on this, or it wouldn't have gotten stalled at the last minute, but I feel good about it, and I think we're going to get it passed this year. I want to turn it over to Ellie now to see if she has anything that she wants to add and to answer any extra questions. Thanks so
Thank
much
you so
for
much,
being-
Vice Chair, and congrats again, well deserved for your new role in ENT, and I thank you again for bringing this back. So I am Ellie Bassett. I'm the Southwest Road Riverkeeper with Arundel Rivers. I'm one of the proud members of Team Septic. Emily Ranson is actually out with Clean Water Action on maternity leave, much deserved. She just had a baby boy like 2 weeks ago. So congrats to her. But, you know, I want to thank the delegate for bringing this important bill. I run a water quality monitoring program, like many of my fellow river keepers, Matt included, and constantly we are seeing high E. coli numbers without clear sources in areas of high septic homes or high septic neighborhoods. And, you know, pollution from septic systems might be small in the grand scheme of looking at bay pollution, but when you're focusing on the hyper-focused level of your kids are swimming in this creek, your kids are swimming in this river, absolutely it is a human health impact. And many people just don't know that they may have a failing septic system, right? Inspections during transfers, inspections during new lease transfers is the easiest way to identify when failures are happening, report it, and make sure that they're fixed. This is a win for homeowners, a win for health department, workers, and a win for water enthusiasts. So I'm here. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have with Delegate Guyton. And otherwise, I'm looking forward to passing this thing this year.
Great. Well, thank you both. I love this bill because at the time of sale of a house, both the seller and the buyer are motivated to close the deal. And so if the septic is, one of those things that the deal is hinging on, hopefully that'll bring some motivated people to the table. I'm curious, where do the realtors fall on this? Have you had any outreach with them, and do you see any support coming from the realtors?
So I always try to have outreach with any of the involved parties, and certainly the realtors are. The realtors, to be honest, they don't want extra things to have to monitor, but they did not come out strongly against this bill, and I don't really expect that they will this year either.
Yeah, great. Awesome.
Now, I have heard, and not to throw a kink in the works, but just so everyone, I have heard that the Mako may be a little more interested. They had no problem with it last year. They may be a little more interested this year because we are requiring the reporting and the compliance piece through the counties. And so we'll see how that goes. We'll be in contact with them and try to work things out and smooth everything over. But I feel that since we got so far with pretty much this exact language last year, that we should be all right.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I really appreciate your leadership. Congratulations again, Delegate Guyton, on the appointment of Vice Chair of ENT. I'm sure you'll be seeing many of us this coming legislative session helping to advocate on all these great bills that are being brought forward.
And I will welcome you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, and I love that bill to transition to our next part of the program here because, as Ellie pointed out, in the grand scheme of the Chesapeake Bay pollution, septic systems aren't necessarily the most sought after solution, right? But when you break it down to that local level, or as we heard a lot, that near shore level where our kids are swimming, where the fish are spawning, where so much happens right in that area where the land and the water intersect, that's really where septic systems can have a really big impact. And so we're going to move into the next part of our presentation with state agencies. And setting the stage for that, we just settled on a new Chesapeake Bay agreement. And that covers a number of different priorities across the environmental movement and what we need to do there. But it hones in on that focus of that nearshore area. Same with the CESAR report, that comprehensive system evaluation response report that was put out on why we aren't meeting our pollution reduction goals. Well, the suggestion there is to switch our focus to this nearshore area. And so nobody else is front and center to these Bay agreements and to other binding and really driving goal setting documents than our state agencies. And so we're going to kick it over to our first state agency presentation today, which will be representing the Department of Natural Resources. And here we have Lydia McPherson, who is the Director of Legislative and Constituent Services at Maryland Department of Natural Resources. In this role, Lydia serves as a key liaison between the department, the General Assembly, and many of you, the public, helping to translate the science, policy, and resource management into action. Maryland DNR plays a critical role in protecting the state's lands, waterways, wildlife, and natural resources, and Lydia is central to ensuring that these priorities are understood, supported, and advanced through effective legislation and public engagement. And so, Lydia, help me engage the public on what the agency priorities are heading into the legislative session for Maryland DNR.
Awesome. Yeah. And I did just want to start out, Secretary Kurtz sends his regrets. He would love to be here today. He is spending some very important quality time with his brand new baby girl. So he sends his regrets, but hopefully everyone understands. I wanted to go over two departmental bills that the department is putting forth this year. The first is a modification to the Tremendous program. If we could go to the next slide. Awesome. So the Tremendous program, it's a program that we use to fund tree plantings. However, in state law, it currently has only the specific purpose of planting native trees and shrubs. Obviously, that's very narrow. And while there are a number of programs that can be used for tree plantings, there are very few fund sources that can be used to do the very important work of site preparation, maintenance, and outreach, all that good stuff. So this bill, pretty simple. All it would do is clarify that the purpose of the program is to advance forest health and resilience, and it broadens the scope of the program to include promotion and maintenance of native trees in addition to planting. This kind of came out of the lessons that we learned from our Tree Solutions Now Act and implementing the 5 million trees goals. We learned that site preparation and maintenance can really help when it comes to retention and just, having overall healthier forests. So again, small change in the language, but hopefully this will have an outsized impact in allowing us to better utilize and deploy this traditionally underutilized fund. So pretty simple. Go to the next one. Awesome. A little bit more comprehensive. This is our adaptation and resiliency bill. The department has made a really big push in recent years to figure out how we can play a role in better helping the state become more resilient and reaching our resiliency goals. The bill does this in both recognizing ways that we can do this here within our own agency, on our own state lands, as well as figuring out ways that we can be better partners to our local governments and communities. Specifically, it looks at a few funding streams and ensures that they are accessible to all of our community members. It removes some financial barriers to entry when it comes to accessing these funds. And it codifies a lot of existing programs here at the department, including resiliency through restoration, which I know that many of you on the call are probably aware of. Really successful pilot program. Believe it was set to sunset in 2023. We would like to take away that sunset because it has been so successful. And And then additionally, it takes a recommendation that came from the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group when it comes to pathways for equitable community participation in state-funded adaptation initiatives. It clarifies the department's ability to engage with our community liaisons, and that will hopefully result in a much stronger, more informed project outcome. So, we at the department, we often implement a project and think about the ecological benefits, but there might be unintended consequences of a project or something that we aren't thinking of necessarily. So any time that we can better engage with our community and learn from them, it's going to result in a better project. So kind of went through that fast. If anyone has any questions, I would love to help answer them.
Yeah, no, those are great priorities for the department, and that community liaison piece is so important. Here on the Eastern Shore, we have a collaborative called Envision the Chop Tank, where we've been able to prove that through this engagement of those that are most impacted, those that often aren't at the table because they're not getting paid to, it's magical when you actually have the ability to pay somebody to come and participate, like many of us advocates or others that are doing this work. And so I really appreciate the department's leadership and actually codifying the expenses and recognizing the cost that goes into that. And so I want to thank you very much. If you want to hang tight, no questions have come in yet, but I encourage anybody from the audience, if you have questions for DNR, Lydia, hopefully you can hang on for a few minutes and see if any come in. That's great. All right. And we're going to move into our next presenter, our next agency here, which is Maryland Department of the Environment. And joining me is, let me make sure I have that right. Yeah, Maryland Department of the Environment. And so joining me is Secretary McElwain. I have the honor to introduce Secretary McElwain, who has served as Maryland's Secretary of the Environment since 2023. And with her, she brings an extensive federal and state experience in environmental policy, operations, and environmental justice, including leadership roles at the California EPA, the US EPA, and the US Department of Energy. Under her leadership, MDE is advancing key initiatives, including what you'll hear today, and including local floodplain studies, administrative compliance process for water supply and appropriation permits, and the bonding insurance requirements for lead inspections. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us on this afternoon. I really appreciate you being here, and we're all excited to hear what the Department of the Environment is planning to work on this session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, this is such a great forum. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me and just, having this opportunity to share what MDE's legislative agenda is for 2026. Just so that you all know, I do have with me Director of Government Relations, Jeremy Baker. He is on here as well. And many other members of my staff and team have been listening in and joining a lot of these presentations throughout this weekend. It has been phenomenal. So again, this is really great and really happy to be here. I know I only have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to go through our proposals rather quickly. So I think if we can get the next slide up, I don't know who's advancing now, but there we go. So the first legislative proposal we have is to modernize local flood studies. Just so that you know, most local governments in Maryland, they're still using the old flood management plans that were created. I think they were created back in 1980 and 1996. So this proposal is going to require that the jurisdictions update their studies and maps, particularly when it comes to the high priority watersheds. It's also going to require that any of the new findings of those studies that they're integrated into their local hazard and mitigation plans. And, of course, this is just extremely necessary because we need to be better prepared for future disasters as we all see and hear about them all the time. And it's all related to climate change. So we need to get ahead of it. And to help pay for all of this, we're going to use, or the state will use 5% of the Comprehensive Flood Management Grant Program, which is about $500,000 per year. And this is not just Maryland. There are other states like Texas and Florida. They're basically doing the exact same thing. They're requiring this same level of flood planning, and I anticipate other states will join in too, because it is that really important. Next slide. The other proposal we have will improve our ability to enforce water and wetland violations, because right now we don't have a streamlined way to penalize violations involving water use permits, tidal wetlands, or waterway construction. So the only way to really deal with even a minor violation is to just go straight to court. So this proposal, it's going to allow our Water and Science Administration to start issuing fines and take enforcement action more efficiently without always having to, go through a full court process, which usually is just not worth it. So this is really important for us. It's not new. We do this for other permits. And as I think I've said this before, some of the things we're trying to do is, again, to be more efficient. So one benefit of this type of update will really help reduce a lot of staff time that we have, dealing with these kinds of issues. So it's really good, and we're looking forward to hopefully getting this passed. Next slide. Okay. Oh, is that it? I can't see it. Okay. The next slide is relating to our proposal to protect homeowners from faulty lead inspections. I have directed my team this year to focus really aggressively on oversight for lead testing and improve our lead program overall. Over the last 2 years, we've had to rescind more than 2,000 lead paint inspections because they were either fraudulent or they performed inadequately. And when we're rescinding those inspections, we know that was the right thing to do. But when we do that, it does mean that landlords and tenants, they have to get new inspections. And a lot of times they have to actually pay for them. So this bill is going to require that all lead abatement professionals, that they carry insurance or bonding. So if an inspector fails to do their job correctly, like again, what we've been finding, this insurance would cover the property owner's costs for a mandatory reinspection that will, that's a result of when we rescind. We have to have the reinspection. So this will help pay for it. I think this is straightforward. It's common sense regulatory update. It's designed to hold those lead inspectors and professionals accountable, and really to protect homeowners from this unexpected costs. So that's pretty much it. The next slide this is just the key text of the bill. That's it. I'm under 10 minutes, so I thank you. I don't know if we have time for questions, but appreciate the time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your time. We actually do have some questions coming in, so if we have a few minutes, if you don't mind, and maybe we can bring Jeremy if you need any assistance here. And Jeremy might be in the attendees if we want to pull him over to the panelists. But a question I had related to, I need to spotlight myself here to show up. Here I am. Hey, Jeremy, how you doing? Good to see you. So with the enforcement bill, a question I had, thinking about really the emphasis on state enforcement, considering the pulling back of these resources from our federal government. And so do you foresee that the current budget, or the proposed budget that we're going to see in a couple weeks here from the governor, will it have enough resources to carry this added load of enforcement? Or are you thinking about how that resource load will increase given this new ability to enforce these permits here?
Jeremy, did you want to answer that?
Yes, absolutely. Hey, everyone. I'm Jeremy Baker. I am Director of Government Affairs here at MDE. Matt, just up front, I want to say thank you so much for having us again this year. I think this is the best way to prepare for session. And to answer the question, yes, I do think, the whole point of this bill is that the middle of our enforcement process for these three key areas, tidal wetlands, waterway construction, and water appropriation and use, we're missing that middle ground enforcement, right? So we have to go straight to court, even for the most minor violations. either those violations are falling through the cracks because they're not worth our Attorney General's time, or we'd have to go through a very lengthy and, again, not always worth it court process. So having that middle ground allows us to get everybody in compliance faster. Everyone doesn't have their guards up as much because the attorneys are not quite as involved in the administrative process. We can, settle the compliance case faster, cheaper for everybody, which allows our inspectors to, and compliance engineers to more efficiently work. And we have been increasing our compliance staff in the last few years, including thanks to several bills that this group has been instrumental in. And so, yes, I do think we are prepared. And I think this gives us just another great tool in the toolbox.
I want to add, I also think that with this bill, a lot of the problems that we're seeing will dissipate because of the bill, right? Because right now, I think a lot of the people and industry that we're dealing with, they realize we're not going to enforce. And so when you have something like this, I think that may go down as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective because we need to have the laws on the books and we need to have the enforcement ability to enforce those laws. And I think this really brings both of those into perspective. So thank you. One more question that came in. Will this apply to existing permits as well as new permits, or will this have a date forward kind of approach looking at it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. And so, we will have that enforcement authority as of the effective date of the bill, right? So any violations that occur, July 1st or October 1st, I think the effective date is going to end up being July 1st for that one. But any violations that occur after that for existing permits or, oftentimes violations are discovered when you're getting your permit renewed. And so, yeah, it is prospective, but it will, apply to current permits as well.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that makes sure we can cover, all the breadth of issues out there that are under permitted activity right now. So I just want to thank both of you for joining us today. I love this program, not only because of the depth of legislation that we hear about, but because of the agency's involvement. It hasn't always been this way where advocates and the agency are working so closely together. But as you pointed out, Secretary, so many of your staff have been here throughout the whole weekend, plugging in and really getting attuned to what's going on. And that brings me a lot of security in knowing that, we've got partners within the agency to work on this stuff. So thank you very much, both Jeremy and Secretary McElwain for joining us and for presenting on these pieces of legislation today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we're going to move to our third and final agency presentation today. And joining us is the Secretary of Department of Agriculture, Secretary Addix. And Secretary Addix, thanks for being here. This is your second year presenting with us, and I really appreciate, again, that engagement and that collaboration with the Department of Agriculture here. For those of you who don't know Secretary Addix, he served as the Secretary of Agriculture since 2023. He brings a strong focus on supporting value-added agriculture, enhancing agricultural education, and promoting farm-to-table connections. Under his leadership, the Department of Agriculture advances sustainable practices, strengthens the state's food system industries, and drives economic growth while protecting Maryland's farms, natural resources, and most importantly, rural communities. So Secretary Addix, thanks again for being here, and we look forward to hearing what the agency has cooking for this General Assembly's legislative session.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, team. Much appreciate the invitation to join, and look forward to giving you a quick overview of what we have in store this session. So we can jump to the next slide. So first and foremost, I want to congratulate the legislature and the governor for the passage of the really, really cool Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act. So that had a bunch of components in it, not just for agriculture and farming with conservation in mind, but also evolving how we farm. And then there was a whole lot of work regarding the fisheries as well. So it was an extremely practical bill that is yielding results. One of the benefits that we have for the agricultural community is the creation of the Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming, or LEAF program. So this is a program that we are building out, talked a little bit about it last year, but it's a program that we're building out and should be launching this year. And what it does is it's focused on two types of practices: conservation practices and community practices. And the whole goal of it is to encourage farmers through incentives to stack their practices. So right now we've got a couple of programs that encourage the adoption of practices, but they're specific practices. And we've seen that certain members of the industry have really begun to lead and go further, farther, faster than other segments of the industry. And so we're trying to harness some of that innovation as the Caesar report recommended, like let's sandbox things, let's try new things. And when they look to be working, let's embed them. There are certain practices that we credit and they feed up into the Chesapeake Bay model. And then there are lots of other practices that other states are not engaging in. So they're not part of the Chesapeake Bay model practice program to meet our WIP goals. But we know from research that they're productive. They're really, really great for keeping nutrients on farms or reducing the application of nutrients. Some are extremely practical in nature, and so LEAF will be able to target these where they're most needed, give the most incentives for where they're most needed, but encourage overall industry participation by just encouraging the stacking of these, and then each year creating a programming, a symposium for the industry to begin sharing the practices that they're engaged in. Two updates. We have a LEAF coordinator who has just started. Elizabeth Hoffman is on our team. She's been working on WIP for the Chesapeake Bay program goals, and we're so excited to have her now focusing entirely on LEAF. So she just began last week. We're going to give her a week, and then we're going to jump in and check on the progress. Cover crop funding, conservation grants, and land preservation initiatives are all encouraged and promoted under the LEAF program. But as I noted, there will be so many other conservation practices, but also for the first time, community practices. And so these community practices will be focused really on some of the other issues that we see are plaguing agriculture, like the lack of connection between our general population and agriculture. And so we'll be incentivizing engagement with the public, whether that is if you're growing food table crops, if you can start a CSA, you will be credited for engaging with the public. If you're engaging in some form of agritourism, and doing it in a way that is truly evolving the literacy about agriculture, then we love that. So we're going to be promoting those things. So next slide. And I should say, actually, on that last slide, we don't have to go back, but we did go back, which is great. Thank you for that. One other component of the Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act is under DNR's code, and it's allowing them to adjust their leases for state-owned land that can be used for farming to make it easier, better, more ideal for smaller farmers, specifically regenerative farmers, folks that are ending up focusing on those table crops. So that becomes not just a let's help new entrants get into the industry, but it also promotes regenerative farming. And then beyond that, it helps us grow our food shed, our food production within the food shed. So really excited about more news from DNR on that this year. Now the next slide. Our only legislative priority this session is to extend and renew our Maryland Horse Industry Board. That sunsets every 10 years, and so we're just extending that. So you'll see us talking about horses a lot. But what we're also thinking about is ensuring that wherever the governor sets the budget for our conservation programs and land preservation, that we can keep that. So those are incredible programs for our industry and for Maryland. Preserving land, no brainer. It gets it out of development and keeps it green and in farm production and conservation, which is so critically important in a high development pressure state like we have. Bay Restoration Fund and other things that money goes to, including cover crops. Cover crops is the single best bang for the buck in terms of keeping nutrients on the land and out of the water. And of course, our cost share program, which is funded through a mix of federal state funds. And we want to make sure that wherever the governor sets the budget, that we are keeping the funding. So I will encourage support for that. If these programs are important, let's try to keep funding for them. We can jump to the next slide, which may be not me. So it's former Director Pinsky who's coming up in a moment. But just wanted to thank everybody for your engagement. We have really attempted to engage with the conservation and environmental community, and you've been instrumental in helping us build out the LEAF program. So keep it up. Keep talking with us. Keep bringing ideas because we've learned so much. We only know what we know. And for so many years, we've been sticking within the agricultural community. So it's great to be out there holding hands with conservation and environment. So, Matt, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. And we do have a question, if you don't mind, just hanging on just a second. So the cost share program that you mentioned, does that also cover urban agriculture? Are there components of that that offer cost share to urban agriculture?
Yes, so there are certain practices under the cost share that will apply to urban agriculture, but we also have a specific urban agriculture grant fund which helps urban ag operations stand up and get moving. It's specifically for infrastructure. So what we found is that urban ag sometimes because of where it is and how it gets started, it does not always have the needed infrastructure, so water, electricity. So just making sure that, there's some grant funding specifically for urban ag needs as well. But please reach out to us and we'll have a good conversation.
Yeah, and what do you suggest is the best way that the community can support your budget initiatives? Knowing that last year was such a big cut for the Department of Agriculture, where do you see the advocacy opportunity? Where do you see the community really throwing support for the funding programs that are so important for you?
Well, frankly, what helped so much last year were the stories told by our conservation partners. The fact that, this is an ag budget line item. However, it is something that is directly impacting the bay, directly impacting, in preservation and, including it's not just cover crops and it's not just the specific conservation practices. It is preserving that land, getting it out from under the eyes of development. And that is both hard development and some soft development, like solar. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity for farmers who want to keep preserving that land as agricultural land because they've invested, sometimes generations in soil improvements and engaging in our practices, that they have the ability to do so. So funding for that, definitely, there's a direct line to conservation.
Yeah, great. And you brought up solar. There's a question about solar, so I can't hold back. But what are you grappling with right now, front and center with solar? You talk about land preservation,
Yep.
And also we're going to hear from Senator Pinsky, who I'm sure is going to hit hard on the need for more alternative energy sources and solar on the shore. So you're right in the middle of it. Tell us a little bit about where your feelings are most right now, and what the public should really understand regarding the solar and agricultural discussion.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings. The industry has a lot of feelings about solar. If you just start with some facts, we need energy. We need to generate energy, and if we're going to generate energy, it should be clean energy. So, we have agreement up to that point. Then the next question is how much land, arable, farmable land is too much to be taking offline. And there's lots of equations and discussions about that. One of the biggest challenges, and I find that a lot of people don't understand this, is there is a tension between solar development, which wants to do it as inexpensively and efficiently as possible, which, the subtext of that can mean that kind of rules out the solar industry targeting rooftops and parking lots because those are rather fussy from an infrastructure standpoint. You have to dig, you have to run, hard lines. You have to, you don't have large scale square feet or acreage. Whereas on a farmland, generally flat, if you're talking about the Eastern Shore, generally flat, easy to install. And so from a solar developer standpoint, farmland, if all things are equal, farmland becomes a priority, and the industry would say a target. One of the things that most folks don't understand is that most of that farmland that you drive through on the way to the beach or, going north on the Eastern Shore, it's not owned by the farmer. And so the farmer doesn't have the ability to make the decisions. The landowner who's leasing it to the farmer does. And so if you're a farmer that's been investing in new equipment based on a certain scale of operations, and all of a sudden 500 or 1,000 of your acres, which could be a quarter, 10%, 50% of your farming operation, gets put into solar, again, you didn't make that decision, someone else made it for you, then your business model collapses. I will say that every time we have this discussion, we're not anti-solar generally, completely on farms, because we want the landowner to be able to have the option to do it. It's just unfortunate that the farmer is not always the landowner. We do have some farmers who have opted to take less productive land and put that in solar, and they've taken that money and they've bought more productive land elsewhere. So, there is a market based component to it, but it's if all things are equal and I'm a solar developer, what looks to be virgin land, but it's really productive, profitable farmland, looks to be the place that I'm going to go target.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And what you bring up is these are really business decisions. In some cases, the farmer isn't the landowner making those decisions, but of course that impact is there. And then on the other side, the business of the solar industry is also has pressure in making those decisions. And so I liked what you said there about thinking creatively about maybe where there is less productive land versus where there's really prime land, and making sure that we're protecting that really, really good agriculture land. And yeah, go ahead. I see you have a
Yeah,
point.
if I could just add one thing, because I see in comment a lot of talk about agrivoltaics, which is of course, the dream and the ideal. One of the challenges with we'll just make it agrivoltaic, and why don't you just farm under it or in between it? That works for a certain type of farmer on a certain type of land. But if you're talking the Eastern Shore, and you're seeing soybeans and corn and sorghum and all of that, the combines are 30, 50, 100 feet wide. And so the rows, in order to farm that way, would have to be that big. That doesn't make any sense for commercial solar. For commercial solar, there are some agrivoltaic and agricultural component options. Obviously, grazing sheep is kind of the ideal. Then the solar developer does not need to mow that area. They've got sheep that are mowing it. And then you've got whatever your product is from sheep, whether it's lamb, whether it's wool, etc. There are some crops that are being shown through some university research studies to benefit from a little bit of shade. Now you have way less density of crops if you're doing it in between rows, but yes, you could plant flowers for commercial uses, not pollinators, but commercial flower. You could plant some fruits as well, but again, the density of it doesn't always pencil out from a farming profitability standpoint. So it is definitely a discussion, something we want to explore, but where solar is being targeted, it does not make sense right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Secretary. I can say I feel comforted in knowing your history in innovation and collaboration and taking on these challenges head on, that they're being thought out, very thoughtfully moving forward, and that you're really keeping in mind, the landowners, the land use, our rural communities, and all of that in the outcomes of these discussions. So again, I want to thank you for joining us today for your second time at the annual Summit for Climate and the Environment. We really appreciate having the Department of Agriculture here. And similar to MDE, I've seen a number of your staff on here this whole weekend too. And so again, that's a really good sign that we're all working together and trying to accomplish what's best for the state of Maryland. So thank you, Secretary Addix, and we really appreciate you being here today. Thanks. All right. So believe it or not, folks, we are at our last presentation of the day. And I will say, with no way is this a closing of a closing, because really this is a high point of the presentation as well, where we have former director, former Senator Paul Pinsky joining us. So instrumental in many of the monumental legislation that's passed in Maryland that's being implemented, the nationally known Climate Solutions Now Act, the effort for putting the right agricultural practices in place, for dealing with the impacts from the poultry industry. All of these aspects and so many more have fallen under Paul Pinsky's belt while his time as senator and while his time as director of the Maryland Energy Administration. And so I'm really happy to introduce you, former Director Paul Pinsky. Thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over for you to really bring this all together for us. We had day one of climate, day two of the environment. You're souped in both of those topics throughout your career here. And, you've had such a impactful career leading us in these initiatives. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to say moving forward for the state of Maryland, given our pressures today, given our successes behind us, and the aspirational goals that we have moving ahead forward with us. So welcome, former Director Paul Pinsky, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure being here and in being such a esteemed company. My former colleagues, Secretary McElwain, Secretary Addicks, people I respect and have loved working with, and hopefully will continue to work in some way, shape, or form. Let me get right into it if I can, Matt. Currently with the laws on the books and the steps already taken, Maryland is one of the leading states in the nation when it comes to addressing climate change. That being said, that is not, however, the best bar to use to measure Maryland. We must look at our effort to move forward and achieve the goals that are currently in law or enunciated by state leaders like the governor. And I think we're pretty familiar with two of them. The Climate Solutions Now Act, which I had the honor of being lead sponsor, called for a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2031 and carbon net neutral by 2045. And as we know, the governor's called for achieving 100% clean energy. So the question is, where are we on those two goals, and what will it take for Maryland to achieve them? I mean, that's what's before us. But I think even more importantly is, what is the role of the people and organizations on the ground, the grassroots, the rank and file activists in pursuit of these goals? And that's what I want to focus my remarks on today, if that's acceptable. Look, the two goals, 100% clean energy and the 60% reduction, are heavy lifts. We know that it remains vitally important to keep up the momentum because the risk of inaction are extremely, they're very extreme. Even with the passing of the Climate Solutions Now Act in 2022, we've seen the number of fires and floods and hurricanes increasing, and the estimates of melting ice caps on top of that is an additional problem. If you watch the evening news, which I still do, either the first or second story leading the evening news virtually every night is fire, is flood, is hurricanes, melting ice caps. And I think back to the discussion during the Climate Solutions Now Act, and somebody asked me, is the 60% goal, is it aspirational? And I said, absolutely not. It's been passed into law, and now it's the time for action. Again, will it be heavy lift? Absolutely. Particularly with the Trump White House pulling in the other direction, fattening the coffers of his friends and contributors in the oil and fossil fuel industries. That creates an additional challenge that we didn't expect in 2022. Now, we heard from Secretary McElwain about 2 years ago. They put a blueprint together for implementing the Climate Solutions Bill. And they put in a number of markers as to how we achieve the goals of the Climate Solution Now Act. One of the markers was to spend $1 billion a year. And they describe actually the investments that need to be made. Now, to date, those investments have fallen short. They called for a cap and invest program. And while a study has been proposed, it hasn't become law. So we are off track, and some would have us retreat even more. Some expenditures have been made through the CEF fund. I know you talked about the CEF earlier this afternoon. While they fall short of the amount called for in the plan, it is important to keep up the pressure. The CEF is a critical component to making progress on slashing emissions from buildings, promoting energy, and in the area of transportation. Now, and the legislators still on the call will be very familiar with this. There have been efforts to divert funds from the CEF, and they should be viewed very, very critically. And I want to say this very carefully. Other than to plug short-term holes, if Maryland indeed faces a budgetary crisis, other than that situation, I believe diversions for other purposes should be opposed. There are a lot of people who want to use the CEF money for this project or that project, or to pay for this or pay for that. And that's dangerous, because that CEF money is some of the only money being used to invest towards that $1 billion that Secretary McElwain's department has called for. I think it's worth going back and reviewing the components of that plan that was completed about 2 years ago. We need to put them in play. And let me mention one of them, and that's the Building Energy Performance, or BEPS, and how critical that is. There's no reason why we can't require certain things on new construction. That new buildings are clean energy buildings. They use heat pumps, geothermal, solar, battery storage, and other technologies. Unfortunately, new construction is a very small percentage of housing stock, which leads back to strengthening and not backtracking on building energy performance. Energy in buildings is the second largest producer of greenhouse gases. The first is transportation. So, we can't forget that. Now, federal subsidies for EVs have gone away, and the emphasis on them has decreased, and that's a problem. We must expand the infrastructure so more people will buy EVs. People's anxiety about range and how many miles they can get or how far they can get is very real. And the more public-facing charges we have, the more it'll ease those concerns. Now, I'm reminded of a battle we fought many years ago before some of the listeners were around. It was originally called the 4P bill. The goal was to reduce NOx, SOx, SO2, mercury, and to reduce carbon dioxide by joining the newly formed Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, which is a cap and trade system among multiple states. It knocked around for a year or so, and it had support of environmental groups, but there was little movement. Well, we took a number of steps. First of all, we changed the name and called it the Healthy Air Act. We increased grassroots mobilization. We expanded the coalition to bring in nurses and doctors, public health advocates. The organization flooded the halls of Annapolis every Monday night. The organization pushed for commitments and created such a strong momentum that legislators could not duck the bill and supporting it. The bill became law, and we feel the effects today in our drive to reduce greenhouse gas and other pollutants. A similar situation developed about 2.5 years ago around the Climate Solutions Now Act. The bill was worked on for about 1.5 years, and in the year before its passage, the House eviscerated the bill. And we said, look, do we accept this? Do we want a half loaf? Was a half loaf enough? And we decided no. And what was a fairly significant coalition doubled down and came back the next year, and the coalition, the grassroots, didn't let up, and it became law in Maryland. There are people who are friends of the environmental movement, but being a friend isn't enough. However good people's persuasion are, my former colleagues in the House and Senate, it's really the grassroots movements, you folks, who are the ultimate persuaders. It's important that people are held accountable. You ask for a commitment, and you hold people to that commitment. And if necessary, you make them uncomfortable. Now we know we're going into an election year, and that is the ultimate measure of accountability. Do you want someone back or not? If someone who made a commitment on one of your initiatives defects, you need to make a lesson out of them and remove them. You knock on doors, you go on social media, you bombard the neighborhoods, voters with your message. And if you remove somebody who committed to you and then dropped off, and you remove them from office, it sends a powerful message to the other 146. So let me end with this. The first task is to set a clear progressive agenda, which I know part and parcel of this summit is whose purpose you're dealing with yesterday and today. And that agenda should push the envelope. It shouldn't be easy wins. You know, we can't settle for where we are. We have to go forward. And once you've decided on that agenda, a progressive agenda, and you educated the grassroots around it and explain why they should own it, why they should care, then the effort is to mobilize people to write, to demonstrate, to fill the halls of Annapolis on Monday nights, and then let it be known with the 147 that there will be accountability. But finally, here's the most important point. It's following through on holding people accountable. You know, you don't offer free passes, even to people who historically have been friends. So, you know, look, you know, I had wins, I had some losses. You know, I tried to convince my colleagues why they should vote for something, but I don't care how great persuader I am. I'm not the person who makes a difference. It's having 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000 people writing, coming to Annapolis and saying, we need this bill and we need to count on you. And if we can't count on you, there could be consequences. So I think what you're doing this weekend, and I know there's another summit in January, making a clear, focused agenda that has a push to it, that is not an easy, simple agenda, but really moves the ball. And then start pushing for commitments and not allowing people to back off and backpedal. And so, you know, you have to not back off on that agenda. I don't think, as I mentioned earlier, you can back off on the C fund that goes to investing in clean energy. You know, you can't divert it to pet projects that don't reduce greenhouse gases. There's a purpose to the C fund, and we should stay very true to it. So, look, you know, I've been in government 39 years. I recently retired, as many of you know. I have always been an organizer. I've worked with environmental movement. Matt and I go back many, many years, visiting the Eastern Shore and River Keepers. And I think those people who are still on the summit and the retreat have to take to heart owning the agenda, committing to working for the agenda. If you can't get to Annapolis and you can write emails, that's great. If you can come to Annapolis, bring signs, camp out in front of someone's door, that's terrific. Whatever it takes. But I think we aren't in a position, just because Maryland's one of the 3 or 5 or 6 leading states, to rest on those laurels. We have to push the envelope. 60% is our goal. It's in state law. It shouldn't be an aspiration. It's something we're pushed to achieve. And the governor's goal of 100% clean energy is something we can achieve and we should achieve. Thank you.
That was great, former Director Pinsky. I really appreciate that. And you really brought it home on what the purpose of this summit is. And to hear it from you, somebody who is on the receiving end of the advocacy, right? You not only did you work with advocates, but you were also there and you understand what that commitment takes and what that commitment looks like. And I really appreciate those final words here moving. Now, you mentioned you're retired, and I know many of us wish you were really still in the game, and I'm sure you are in some ways. And just by your advice here today, we can tell that you're still very passionate and care very much about seeing these policies fully implemented and reaching the goals that have been set for it. And so I can't underscore enough of how important it is that we all engage in that action. You know, what you mentioned to me about getting commitments from others, that's where accountability starts. You know, until we can actually have the other people or have those decision makers commit to what we want or not commit, that's when we really know where accountability is going to lie. And so asking those hard questions, engaging in those tough discussions are really important for making sure that we're pushing our initiatives forward and doing so successfully. And so I want to thank you for wrapping everything up today and for your almost 4 decades of leadership in the state politics and for the number of countless of meaningful and high impactful legislation that you brought forward. And then to end it all off with your time at the Maryland Energy Administration implementing that strong policy, the Climate Solutions Now Act. We all really thank you for your hard work and really appreciate your blessing to us and moving this stuff forward, continuing the legacy that you've set. So thank you very much, former Director Paul Pinsky, for those kind words moving us forward. And I just want to say that's it. With that, we've reached the end of the 7th Annual Legislative Summit on Climate and the Environment. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to give you a heartfelt thank you to every single person who joined us over these past 2 days, whether you attended one session yesterday or both of them today, whether you've asked questions, shared resources, or just simply showed up to listen and learn. Your presence matters. And over the 400 people who joined us over the past 2 days, this summit exists because of you. I also want to thank our incredible speakers, our legislators, advocates, agency leaders, and experts who took the time out of their busy schedules this weekend to share their work, their insight, and most importantly, their passion for the legislation that they're working on. We heard bold ideas, real challenges, and honest conversations about the trade-offs shaping environmental policy in Maryland. That kind of access and transparency is something we should never take for granted and is exactly why this summit exists. And of course, I want to give a huge thank you to the organizing team and sponsors who made all of this possible. Cecilia and Alex from the Maryland Legislative Coalition, Monica and Lori and Dave from the Climate Justice Wing, Jackie from the Sierra Club Lower Eastern Shore, Grace, my colleague from Shore Rivers, and Jennifer from the Mizrahi Family Charitable Fund. This summit only happens because of your dedication and the belief that the belief in the power of informed, engaged communities is really what is important. So please join me one more time in giving all of them a virtual round of applause. Before we sign off, I have a couple quick reminders here. First, you can see the QR code here. If you would please take that link and fill out the survey. It's a really brief survey, shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes, but that'll help us shape this program for next year to continue to be impactful and as engaging as we can. I also want to point out that it doesn't end here. There's a number of other events coming up. Looking at this list here, you could take a photo of this screen if you want and then look at the links later, or go ahead and start scanning these different QR codes. But around the screen here, you'll see a number of lobby days, action days, advocacy programs. You got the CCE Summit on January 28th in Annapolis, the in-person summit highlighting other environmental legislation. All of this is great opportunity to get more involved, to get more engaged, and to make an even more impactful presence in legislation throughout Maryland. And so what are some next steps? Things that you can do to get engaged. Contact the advocates and legislators that you heard from today. Reach out. We'll be posting the presentation and the recording on the Maryland Legislative Coalition's website, so you can go back and get everyone's email address. You can go back and see all the presentations that were presented. And if just by signing up, you'll get all of this in your email. So it'll be right at your fingertips. Email and call your legislators. You can find your legislators at mgaleg.maryland.gov. And you can look up bills at the mgaleg.maryland.gov. And you can look up the different bills that were presented on over this past weekend and how you can track those and get involved. And if you're interested in submitting written testimony or testifying in person, we've got the resources for you. The sponsoring organizations, the advocates, the legislators, all of them want you to get involved in the bills that they're working on. And we want to help shepherd our communities into this process so that we can be as impactful as we can. There's an email address down there for the Maryland Legislative Coalition that you can reach out to if you have any questions at all about the process or any part of getting involved. And so I want to remind everyone the summit was recorded and it will be shared on the website and with every attendee. And again, please take the survey so we can help us build this program to be as impactful as it was this year into the future. So as we close, I want to leave you all with one final thought. Over the past 2 days, we've heard about urgent threats, promising solutions, and bold visions for Maryland's future. And I know it can feel overwhelming. It's easy to walk away thinking, This is important, but what can I really do about it? I ask myself that all the time. The answer is a lot. Legislative sessions aren't just shaped by insiders, they're shaped by people who show up, speak up, and stay engaged. Lawmakers notice when when their constituents call, they notice when they write and testify, and when they organize the community to help. And the most powerful voices are not isolated, they're connected. So don't let this summit be the end of your engagement. Let it be the beginning of your engagement for this General Assembly's legislative session. Find your local advocacy group, find your Riverkeeper organization, plug into the coalitions that are working on these bills. Follow the bills that you care about and share what you've learned here. And when the time comes, make the call, send the email, and just show up. Do anything you can, because change doesn't happen in Zoom rooms alone. It happens when informed people take action. We're entering the legislative session next week that will shape how Maryland protects its waters, safeguards its public health, and responds to climate change for decades to come. And every one of you has a role to play in that. So thank you for learning, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of this movement. On behalf of the entire Summit Committee, we are so grateful that you all joined you. And take care, stay engaged, and let's get to work. Signing out here from the beautiful Eastern Shore, my name is Matt Pluta. I'm the Choptank Riverkeeper of Shore of Rivers, and it has been an honor and a pleasure to take you all through this great program this past week. And I look forward to seeing you as the session continues. Thank you all so much.